Just give me a moment and about doctors can help. I know there's like 3 or 4 senators that the budget thing.
There's like a spirit. It was weird. They're like, I don't really have like that complex. It's like a simulation software. That's the so yeah, but it's like pretty simple. It's like a lot more complex software. Tuesday, Friday. You're telling me the software it's been down. I don't know how they're just yeah, I don't know. No, I hear you. It's funny. I think I got it's going to be a lot of variance. I'm sure. Yeah. Right now, if I process this, I've got
You put one of them right there in the home. I really do appreciate it. Honestly, it's fine.
Okay, I'm coming.
I need a sewing machine.
That's what I'm saying. Exactly. I usually bring 2 sweaters, but I did not bring 6 sweaters.
Oh my gosh, wait, you said
That's all I got.
it's a whole rule show me insulin twice thing is in there. No. No, that works. Still really much.
Welcome.
I think at this point it's just like
So you could unfollow this guy for like 5 minutes and he's like going to his and then bedtime.
I keep counting, but for some reason numbers just don't magically go up. I'm still behind 4.
They say we don't have to they say we have to Thank you.
It was like, this is the thing, senior year and last semester, I want to do this. That's my thing. Last semester, here we go, let's do it.
I'm leaving it.
all right, everyone. We're gonna call to order at 6:30 p.m. I don't think we have quorum yet, but hopefully we'll just keep going, and hopefully by the time we get there, we have it. So, as of right now, oh yeah, public comment. Is there any public comment? Seeing none, get ready to attendance, we take care of that. Moving to approval of the minutes. Do we have a motion to approve the minutes of the last meeting? Mitchell and Katie. Is there any discussion on the motion? Seeing none, moving to, wait, and no one here. Chief Justice, can we approve minutes without a quorum? No. All right, well, yeah, go ahead.
Can we motion to rewrite the agenda and put reports first?
We can just, we won't vote on it yet. We'll just move past that for now and move into reports. Just exactly what you wanted to do. I just for a motion. I believe first up is Noah Frank, but Noah is not here yet. So, go ahead.
Point of order, the electronic voting system, I know it's open.
It's, yeah, we're working on it.
Right, just making sure you guys know.
Yeah, for some reason, everything seems to be not going right this evening. Is here. I can give her a interest. So, Alright, we're going to start by moving into reports because we don't need to vote on that. So we'll start off with Holly-Ann Lau will give the report of Student Services Chair.
Yeah.
Oh yeah.
Okay.
Give me the other one.
Thank you.
Hi everybody, so I'm doing the report for Derek. So hi all, hope everyone had a wonderful Thanksgiving break. So Student Services had accomplished a lot recently, and here are just like a few things that we've done so far. So tampon time, there's 14 new tamper-proof metal dispensers that have been mounted and staffed by facilities in new locations, and this happened during Thanksgiving break, and that's a huge step in the 2 years of efforts in trying to make menstrual products accessible to all students. So special recognition to Tampon Time Task Force Project Lead Jackie, or the Tampon Fairy as we see her in the group chat, for all her hard work on getting that done. We had the event yesterday, and there's a bunch of, all the locations are on the on our Instagram. And the Halal Food Initiative, so we have successfully encouraged dining services to roll out a new halal section in the South Dining Hall, and there's a projected budget of $100,000 for kitchen modifications, and then another $100,000 for hiring new culinary specialists. So bringing halal options to grab-and-go stations in the South and towers are also in the works. And special recognition to Food Insecurity Project Lead Ethan Whistler for his work on that as well. On water bottle refill stations, so we've secured express support from facilities with a budget of $30,000 so far to install new water bottle refill stations at various residential spaces on campus. So we're going to be passing $15,000 through the committee as USG's financial commitment towards that effort, and the installation is projected to be completed by winter or spring semester, and special recognition to Sarah Hill for her work on that. Finally, on our initiatives, clap for Sarah. Finally, on our initiatives, so adding a stop for red and silver lines at Music Building, as we talked about last Senate. So Transportation Services is adding a new stop at the Music Building for red and silver lines starting spring 2020 at the urging for our legislation that was passed through committee and Senate. And special recognition to Samit Kadian for his hard work on that. Nice happy news. So Derek is sad to report that he's going to be stepping down from the position of Student Services Chairperson by the end of winter break. So USG leadership has been notified and accommodations will be made for proper transition. It's been a great honor for him to serve in that capacity for the last year and a half and led such a hard-charging and committed body of public servants. So he's going to cherish the memories that he's made and will always be proud of the tangible initiatives that have been spearheaded together to impact the quality of lives of our fellow Huskies. He's confident that whoever is selected to step into his shoes will continue to breathe the excellence that Student Services Committee has always bred since 2014. So that's the end of his report. Yeah, farewell from Derek. He's not here right now. I'll tell him on flag.
Is there any questions? Well, if you can take them if you'd like.
Okay, let's see if I
Point
can
of
answer.
information, and this could possibly be, how will the application process and timeline roll out for the?
Yeah, sorry.
Hi, David. That's a great question. So we are going to be focusing on filling up the new chair as soon as possible. This will most likely go through JobX because it is now a paid position. So we'll be hiring this person over the next few weeks. And Derek has made a commitment that he will be transitioning this person throughout winter break. And so as soon as the new semester comes up, this person will be up and running and will have their first committee meeting within the first 2 weeks as well. So ASAP.
Any other questions? Great.
We'll now move into the report for the Academic Affairs Chair.
Awesome.
I just want to see if it updated. Yes, it did. Okay. Yeah, okay.
Hi, everybody. Hope we're all doing well, and good luck on finals, but I should probably say that at the end. Okay, so those are my office hours as of right now. I'll still be in the office next week, so if you want to come by to my hours, they will change for next semester. And then today was the Finals Care Fair. Thank you all who helped out with the assembly and the actual event. We finished the assembly in an hour, which is, according to me, USG record. And we were out of thermoses in the first hour, and using Uconn, we had 1,300 people come to this event, and we ended an hour early because we were all out of everything. So I would call it a very successful event, and it would not have been possible without you all, so thank you all so much. And the free Husky print event is currently going on, just so you know, so you can also print. It's going till Friday. And then Dining Hall Extension, we are working on advertising this, but McMahon and Northwest will be open until 1 a.m. during finals week, and that is now going to be in the process of being advertised. And working with University Senate to create the new general education requirement feedback, and that's still in the process. Yeah, that's it. Okay.
Any questions for the Academic Affairs Chair? Betsy.
Free printing work. I read something about like USG tab.
Yeah, so actually you just go in and you print as you would normally do in the library. So you go to one of the computers, you send it to the printer, and then once you swipe your ID in the printer, it'll show up a cost center. And in the cost center, you click USG free print, you'll see a credit of $4, and you can print up as much as you want that's worth $4, and that'd be about 80 pages black and white, and a little less than that for color.
Point of information, with McMahon and Northwest being open, does that mean they're serving food, or are they open for us to be in there?
So they won't be serving as much food as the regular assembly lines, but they will be serving snack-like items as well as coffee straight throughout. And it'll be a place for students to study as well.
Will McMahon have pizza?
I would assume not, but let's hope. Okay.
Any further questions? Seeing none, we'll move into the board of the student development chair. Is there?
I have nothing.
Okay, we'll just, it's fine. That's kind of today. I think the external affairs chair is on his way as well. I think The comptroller's on their way as well, so we'll go Vice President.
Welcome back, everybody. Hope everyone had a great break. So pretty short this week. Essentially, community groups were sent out this week, so definitely check out the roster if you want to check out your teams. More information is going to come over winter break about the organization in terms of functionality, stuff that's going to be happening next term of the community groups, as well as who's going to be your community group associates. And then also we'll be renovating or recarpeting the inventory room starting December 9th. So if you had an issue, whether it was tampon time, final care package, make sure that your stuff in the inventory room is packed up and ready to go. It's going to be moved across the street over winter break. They're going to recarpet it. They're going to move everything back. So just to make sure that nothing gets lost. If you do want to volunteer, we're going to be around between December 9th and December 12th, I believe. You want to help volunteer, it's going to be me, Chris, and a few other students moving some stuff out. You're more than welcome to, and just shoot me an email or a text message.
Any questions for the Vice President? Seeing none, we'll move to the report of the Chief Justice.
All right. Good evening, everyone. Pretty quiet for me. I had the privilege of working on new election policies. Hopefully, you'll all look upon those with great interest later tonight. And also a little revision of the Appeals Board bylaw, again, which you will have the pleasure to view tonight. I yield.
Any questions? Madam President? Good thing. Is this should be.
Yeah, that's good.
That's the.
All right, folks, I hope you had a beautiful Thanksgiving break. So a few things for me. The Chief Diversity Officer Committee, we're still working on that. We've had 2 meetings so far, so just working on what to expect next. I've had my office hours at the at ASAP already, so I'm hoping to have office hours at the AACC, Rango Center, Women's Center, the Puerto Rican Latin American Culture Center, as well as our Native American cultural programs, just to make sure that their voices are inputted for the CDO. Our semesterly review and leadership meeting went very well. We got a lot of feedback from other student leaders within USG and are hoping to implement many of these changes for next semester. The Student Recreation Advisory Committee, so I'm working with Cindy Costanzo, the director of our rec center, to build this committee up again for next semester. So I will be soliciting applications. If any of you are interested in being part of that, please let me know, and I will get you on the email list. Town halls, so we're going to have some sort of town halls next semester. Every department that I've talked to you about this kind of has different focus in what they would like to do. I would love to have a town hall with the police department, dining services, res life, etc. So we'll be working over winter break on those as well. The New York Times will hopefully be implemented for next semester. The problem that we're facing currently is that we aren't able to give undergrad information to the New York Times, such as our emails and their IDs, so then it's hard for students to then access the New York Times for free. So we're trying to kind of combat that battle currently. The statement of position that was passed a few weeks ago on the awareness from faculty and staff on issues on campus was brought to Senate Executive Committee, and they're hoping to put it on the next University Senate agenda. So staff and faculty are aware of this, and we are hopefully working on making it passed by the university. I'm currently also working on provost changes to the curriculum on various different aspects, one of those being incorporating more diversity courses and curriculum in our FYE courses, and then bringing student initiatives to Senate Executive Committee. So I'm hoping, I've mentioned the textbook transparency as well as the water bottle refills, but if there's any specific piece of legislation or statement of positions that you have written and you would like me to bring it to Senate Executive Committee, please email me directly. And usually they're very receptive about student issues and the things that we have passed. So please let me know, and I would love to bring it forward as well. And quick thing, we have a few office personnel changes. So Shelby is our new full-time staff member. She started this Monday. If you all knew who Daria was, she now sits at Daria's old desk. So if you see her, just introduce yourselves, let her know who you are, and I'm sure she'll really appreciate that. At our front desk now, we have someone named Lindsay, and she will be working part-time for us, around 20 to 30 hours a week. So she replaced Kathy's old position temporarily, and we are currently looking for a fourth financial assistant that will take the position up for Nikki. So in total, we hope by the beginning of the spring, we will have a full staff. Having staff shortages has made it very hard on Dawn, especially with the amount of POs and initiatives that we have going on. So if you see Dawn, just give her a thank you. She's been working extremely hard for us this semester. And lastly, wrapping things up for the next semester, focusing on outreach initiatives and events. Our EOC is hoping to have some sort of USG involvement fair where we highlight every single subcommittee, task force, as well as project that we are doing, and just for students to be aware, as well as get involved in these committees as well. I'm hoping that for next semester that we are able to advertise every task force, every subcommittee time, and put them all over the res hall so people can get involved all throughout the year. And yeah, the semester's over. We have 1 more week left, so congrats, you made it. Thank you.
Any questions for the president? Seeing none, we'll move back into the report. We'll start with the comptroller. His report.
Yeah, I'm sorry, I did not update it today. I was hoping to get out of a meeting before. It was supposed to end at 6 and ended at 6:45. So anyway, I have it in my head. So tonight, you guys will be seeing a slew of new funding policies that we hope, that Aaron and I hope are received favorably. We spent a considerable amount of time working on them over the last month or so, so I just ask you kindly to maintain an open mind when you hear them all. So we'll explain those. I will be bringing forward a nomination tonight for Deputy Comptroller, so that will happen. Over the last 2 weeks, I've been conducting interviews for the Deputy Comptroller position. I will be looking to hire a second Deputy Comptroller, but given the time crunch, I'm bringing one forward right now so that they could assist me over winter break with going through informational budgets. I extended the deadline for the informational budgets to this Friday. I extended the deadline because I got a few requests over Thanksgiving break for an extension, so I just wanted to be fair to everybody, ensure that they get their money. I'm also still going through job applications for the inventory director, so they will be brought forward to you guys at the beginning of the spring semester. Been meeting with student groups regularly about funding exceptions. They have quite a few questions about the variance policy that's coming forward tonight. So whether that gets passed or not, they're waiting to hear about how to proceed with their exception that they're requesting for the spring. The funding system reopens on December 30th, and at that point, we'll be accepting funding requests at the current moment for 6 weeks from December 30th. If the policy for 8 weeks passes tonight, we'll continue to accept stuff between that 6 and 8 weeks so that groups aren't penalized, but we will require groups that are 8 weeks out to submit at that time, and I'll explain that in a little bit. And I guess, and then SFAC, I've been working with President Thacker on SFAC for the past couple weeks. That rough draft is completed, and it's being sent to some of our financial advisors, and then we'll go to David Clokey and the SFAC committee. We're seeing an extension until Monday, this coming Monday, to submit that. I think that's it for me. Oh, and I'm presenting a preliminary budget tonight for spring 2019. So that's everything. Sorry, Josh.
No, question.
Yes.
Do you have,
it's in the public folder.
did you put it in?
Mm-hmm.
Thank you, I appreciate it.
Yep.
I'll just add it to the
Not the Senate folder, my folder.
Okay, well, I'll transfer it.
Yeah, but it's up there. So yeah, that's it. Any questions for me? No? Cool, thanks.
Seeing none, we will now move into the report of the student development chair.
Hi, okay. Hi, everyone. Okay, so for student development, next semester, there's a lot going on. First of all, Cultural Appreciation Series. We have 4 centers left. That means 8 more, 4 times 2, that's 8 more events for the series. We also have a few other events, and in total, we're looking at around 11 to 12 events, but we have a great committee, we have great leaders, and there's a lot of delegation going on. So we already had a little bit of practice this semester, and everything went great. So we're feeling confident, and we're feeling very happy. Meetings with all the centers have already started happening. We have point persons for each center, and we have events set for all the centers and dates and places. They're all set, except for one of the centers, which we will be working on very soon. I think I'm not missing anything. Yes. Questions? What? Yes. What day is it today? December 3rd, yesterday, International Day of People with Disabilities happened. It was great. Thank you to everyone who came. Shout out to Dalton. He took on the whole thing himself, and Sophia helped him a lot. So that was all them, so I'm really proud of them, and I'm really excited for next semester. Anything else, questions, or something I forgot again?
We have one in the back.
Yeah.
What's the Dear World College Tour?
Oh, have you seen the pictures where people write things with like a black ink on their hands and they take pictures with a black background? They were here, I think, 2 years ago or one year ago. We're trying to implement that for the series. They let you pick a theme, and we're going to pick like a cultural theme. That event is still, we have to check if we want to do it because it's a long process, but that's one of the options we have. Yeah. Anyone else?
All right. Seeing no further questions, we'll move to the report of the Internal Affairs Chair.
Hello, everybody. Hope everybody had a nice break. Sorry I'm horribly underdressed. As Comptroller Sacramento was saying, we were in a meeting that's supposed to get out at 6. I thought I would be able to change, but last year I am. Okay, so we had our final meeting of internal last night. Thank you guys for everybody in the committee who was able to make it out. We did a whole lot of looking at a couple of really big bills that are going to come on tonight. I'm really happy to say that Internal Affairs has sponsored Promise. We've worked a lot of aspects of the Peers Act, as well as the reforms to the election procedures and the outlines that we put there. It was mostly moving around tables, changing some wording. Fortunately, Damani was there to help us guide through that process. I'm really excited for a lot of the bills that are going to be coming up tonight. This is going to be an incredibly important Senate. And have lasting impacts, I'm sure, going into next semester. I'm really proud of the work that everybody's done. Thank you. We had a great first semester with this pilot project, and I think we really found a place for ourselves here in this organization. I'm happy to make us more accountable to ourselves and to the student body, which was my mission in the first place. So besides those bigger goals, proud of the things we sponsored, looking forward to it. Any questions?
Well, seeing none, we'll move into my report. I suppose whenever the External Affairs Chair shows up, we'll have to do his report. So there's not, I honestly, there isn't too much going on. It's pretty quiet. Final game night is tomorrow night. When's it start? So right after student services, there's the final game night. I unfortunately can't be there because I have to work. What a shame. But you should absolutely come. It'll be an opportunity for you to de-stress, have some free food. I think we're getting cookies. We'll see what we can do about some more milk. Maybe we'll have some bedtime stories, something going on, de-stress a bit. I'm personally not very good at that, but I'm sure someone is at leadership can tell a good story. Other things coming up, the promise. I'm pretty sure like 90% of you, if not more, have heard about this by now. It's gone through like every single committee twice, as well as like multiple individual reviews. This is the Student Bill of Rights that I was talking about at the beginning of the semester. It's finally here. It's been amended so many times I can't even count. It's here on the Senate floor to be considered by all of you tonight. I'm really looking forward to hearing all of your thoughts on it and hopefully passing it so we can set in stone what it is USG is going to advocate for no matter what comes. The PEERS Act is the legislation regarding ex officio senators, so we will be voting on that tonight. And hopefully passing that as well, and not only give ex officio senators voting rights, but also expand who gets that representation and where it goes. That will be good, I think. Our ex officio senators would say they'd much prefer if they could vote. We're glad to have them along regardless. And then the final note is SL review. Over winter break, I'm probably going to release a form to all the senators. It will not be anonymous, but it will be an opportunity for many of you, if not all of you, if you'd like, to give feedback to my performance, the individual performance of other Senate leadership members, to all of us in general. We'll take the first caucuses of the semester and take those responses and kind of build off those, have a conversation on what we can do better going forward and what we can look for, what we've done well, and so. I do want to take a moment and say I appreciate you all. This semester has been really good. I've really enjoyed it. Looking forward to next semester, and I really do appreciate you all coming out, especially since I know it's finals and I know it's stressful. All that aside, are there any questions for me?
Did you say it was anonymous or not?
It will not be anonymous.
What's the reason for that?
The reasoning for that is it's only going to serve as a starter to a conversation, so it's not meant to be like everyone gives their feedback. It's only going to be like whatever feedback is given through there will then be like brought to the entire body for consideration. We hope to start a conversation and have more free flowing of ideas, and also, frankly speaking, sometimes with anonymity, the responses aren't the most productive. So we're hoping to, yes, with that comes a little bit of responsibility, but we're hoping that senators will love up to it and then carry that forward from there in a setting that works best for everyone. Further questions? We'll now move back into consideration of the minutes. It was motioned and seconded already. I'm not inclined to do it again. We'll just leave it with whoever done it. I think it was Mitchell and Cade. Is there any discussion on the minutes? Seeing none, we'll move into a vote. All those in favor, please signify by saying aye. Aye. All those opposed, please signify by saying nay. Any abstentions? In the opinion of the chair, the ayes have it. The motion carries. All right, time to get into all business. The External Affairs Chair. Would you like to give me a report?
Say it again?
Would you like to give me a report?
Sure.
Before we move into old business, we will entertain a report from the External Affairs Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I apologize for my tardiness. I was in a meeting with Scott Jordan that just finished. I had a follow-up conversation with him after the larger meeting that I'm sure the Vice President touched on in his report. I kept this short. So that's why I'm late. Earlier today, also, along with some other people who are sitting behind me, had the opportunity to meet with President Castellanos, and we talked about a variety of different issues that are going to come up for the Board of Trustees and his office and the student body in general in the upcoming future, to include, we had a lengthy discussion on on transfers and transfer students and how the university can better support them. More narrowly to external affairs, over the next few weeks, I'll be working with my deputy chair and state affairs vice chairs to get ready for the legislative session in the spring. That's both going to involve things like soliciting applications from students to write legislation and testify in person before the state legislature. And that is also going to include, on the 20th, the MLK Day of Service, which I've been telling you about. You'll see some stuff coming both via email and social media on that as it gets closer. I'll go to questions.
Any questions for the External Affairs Chair? Seeing none, we will now move into old business. Now, these two items are written by the same three authors, I believe. Are those authors here tonight? Okay, has anyone been, like, in contact with the authors? Does anyone, like, does anyone want to present the legislation on their behalf? That's kind of what I'm looking for. If there's no one, I'd really rather just kind of glaze by this for now, and we'll come back to it at a later date. See if and when we can get in contact with the authors, simply because having legislation that, like, no one can answer questions about and no one can present is kind of tough. But if anyone would like to motion in second, you have that option. Is that a motion?
Yes.
So, for the first item, that is a motion to consider. Okay.
Indefinitely. Well, to table until the authors tell us that they want to.
Okay. There's a motion on the table. There's a motion to table statement of position regarding health misinformation on campus until the authors wish to bring it up. There's a second from Senator Athena. I'll just go to a vote on this. All those in favor, please signify by saying aye. Aye. All those opposed? Any abstentions? One from Senator Collins. Opinion of the chair, the ayes have it. Motion carries. Next item is statement of position regarding Women's Center in Eastern Connecticut. These are the same authors. Would you care to make the same motion? Same motion is being made, seconded by Mosley. All those in favor, please signify by saying aye. Aye. All those opposed? Any abstentions? Any of the chair, the ayes have it. Motion carries. If only it keeps at this pace for the rest of the meeting, we'll be done pretty soon. First item on the agenda, an approval of a deputy comptroller. Do we have a motion? Motion goes to, second goes to Chapman. But I'm going to invite the comptroller up at this time to present his nominee.
Hello again, everybody. So tonight I would like to nominate Senator Allen as the Deputy Comptroller. So quick round of applause for that. So the reason why I decided to move forward in conjunction with the Vice President, with Stuart, is because Stuart is somebody that's involved in the organization and has a background in the policy, very strong background in the policies of USG. And one of the things that I was looking for in a deputy comptroller was somebody that had that familiarity with the policy, because half of this job is financial. In my opinion, half of this job is financial, and the other half is very policy oriented. So luckily for Stuart, he has background in both. He has a background in USG, but he also has been a diligent employee of Kohl's and has experience conducting inventory and is a salesperson, which I was surprised to hear in his interview. So between those two parts of his background, we felt that he was more than perfect person for the role. So I do hope that you confirm him tonight, and I look forward to getting to those informational budgets once winter break arrives. So.
Does the nominee accept his nomination? Are there any questions for the nominee? Any discussion? Seeing none, we'll move into a vote. This requires a majority. All those in favor of approving Stuart Allen as the Deputy Comptroller, please signify by saying aye. Aye. Those opposed, please signify by saying nay. Any abstentions? In the opinion of the chair, the ayes have it and the motion carries. I'm just remembering something as well. So I've been talking a big game this whole semester about the online voting system, and I want to finally use that tonight. So we'll use it starting this next item. So the way that'll work is just everyone, if you have the, pull up the Senate electronic voting form on your screen and just have it ready to go. Don't submit it yet. What I'll do once we move into voting is I'll give about 30 seconds for everyone to cast their vote. So if you can't access the form, figure that out now. No problem. That way we know what's going on. And if you don't cast your vote in that 30-minute period, you'll just abstain. There will probably be a few missteps at first, but we'll get used to it. This is just so we can track people's voting record and place it on the website. Our minute taker, he's been doing a wonderful job of that so far, but it's not like fair for me personally to put that all on her, so I hope to be doing so practice through my office as well. So just, if you could all get that up now in preparation, would be much appreciated. But with that, move into the second item, funding update, variances, second chance funding, submission deadlines, and other changes. Do we have a motion? Motion goes to Collins, second goes to Bruce. All right, I'm going to invite the author/authors of legislation to present it. You'll have 10 minutes.
We're not going to take 10 minutes. So one thing that I would ask you to do, if you're not familiar with these policies, to please pull them up on your computer and start skimming through them. So I guess we can each go through. Can we go to the actual policy? Okay.
Why don't we just work
You wanna
on
do
it
first?
out? Therefore, by default.
Okay, so the first one is, we'll just do that one. The first one is changing the 6-week deadline to the 8-week deadline. This is probably the one that's going to be the most controversial. The reason why we are doing this is because we would like to pass the 8-week deadline with the variance policy. So we'll talk about the variance policy in a little bit. But that's like, we would like them to be a package deal, because if we pass the variances, the amount of variances that we anticipate receiving would mean that it's going to increase a lot of stress. It's going to increase stress on the funding system and the funding staff to process those variances while processing everything else that we get that is in compliance with 6 weeks. So if you guys are not in favor of 8 weeks, we ask that provide the question however you want to do so, but do not pass variances at 8 weeks, because that's going to create a little bit of hell for us.
Okay, the next one is just sort of rewriting the 3 business days, 72-hour deadline that confuses everyone. Just to say that it is excluding weekends and university-sanctioned holidays, which is what it does. And we, the funding staff, are going to start letting groups know when they need to resubmit their requests by, an exact date and exact time. So it's just very clear, very open, very transparent, so that the confusion gets alleviated.
Up next is just clarifying the language around what 3 returns is, and when a request is returned 3 times, that is then subject to denial, or once 3 returns are exceeded. So it's just to clarify that a little bit.
Just to add on there, so I rewrote it this way. It doesn't mean that at 3 returns you're going to be denied. There's a little bit of confusion there, because sometimes the funding staff, every once in a while, they make an error and it has to be returned and they don't count that. So we don't, sometimes groups think that on that 3rd return they're done. So the point is, you're not. Yeah, what's the next one?
The funding process, at the end of the funding process, the president and comptroller sign, essentially approve. They don't edit the numbers on the purchase order, because that's just not really the way that system works. So the word discretionary didn't really make a ton of sense. So it's saying that the final signatures are relevant there, and then the discretion parts are elsewhere integrated within the policies, especially within the second chance funding policy, which we will get to later.
Okay, so the next one is about another highly controversial policy about networking and career advancement. It read originally commensurate activities that are intended for networking or career advancement, and we are changing that to be whose primary focus. Whenever we see the word networking, funding staff immediately throws up red flags. Hopefully with this wording, when networking isn't such a big aspect, we won't throw up as many red flags, or maybe people won't include it as much, because unless you're going to a conference that is the student networking conference of the year, it should be pretty much okay.
And just a little tidbit, the reason behind that one is it was brought to my attention that that's one of the few times that the funding staff have a divided vote. So the real purpose of the funding staff is that they should strictly interpret the policy. So if they're strictly following, not interpret, they're supposed to strictly follow the policy, so the vote should not be divided. The way it was written previously, that was sometimes, 6, what do you think?
We are 14.
14 people. So that sometimes was an 8 and a 6 or a 7 and a 7. So to me, that meant that the policy was not effective.
The next one is just to sort of clarify a Tier 3 policy that we have run into with funding this year. A group recently requested funding for an undergraduate student that per Tier 3 policy that is not allowed. And so we're just delineating it in our policies as well, so that while groups should be aware of Tier 3 policies, it's just sometimes easier to just put it right in front of them. So that's up with that.
So this next one I'm really excited about because it's going to cut down on a decent amount of paperwork on our end. And the reason why is because when groups have to pay, when we fund at 90 and 95, so the way the policy was written was 90% if you collected dues or were not open to the undergrad. So let's say you had tryouts. If you had tryouts or you collect dues, you would be funded at 90%. You'd be funded at 95% if you're open to everybody and do not collect dues. So the reason why we're bumping it up to 100 for everybody is A, when we do that 90, 95, whatever it is, the registration fees that we're paying, we cut out a check for 100%, but that doesn't happen until the group pays their 5 or 10%. So it's more paperwork, we have to wait for the group to come in, sometimes it delays things. So by doing 100%, hey, you're approved for 100%, and then we send out the check as soon as it's written. And the other thing is we do a considerable amount of registration fees, so we kind of decided to pick this as one of the things that we're increasing to see how much cost it's going to see how much it costs us in the future. Part of what I want to do here in my time is to increase spending to Tier 2s because we've budgeted like $750 in the past and then we bumped it down to $650. So I'd really like to see that $750 number hit, and we're hoping that with some of the increases we get closer there. And because we spend so much money on registration fees, we feel like this extra 5 or 10% will be significant. It's all about getting the money back to the groups. Okay. So the next one is we're doubling the allocation for round-trip tickets. The reason why we're doing this is because it says in the funding policies that we fund travel within the contiguous United States. So I interpret that as us encouraging students to go around the country and try finding a flight to the West Coast that's not a red-eye for $300 or even a red-eye for $300, and it's virtually impossible. So we want to make sure that groups, if they choose to go to the West Coast for some sort of opportunity that's integral to their mission, that they're able to do so without incurring crazy costs to themselves. So that's why we're bumping it up to $600. The other one is increasing the mileage from 500 to 1,000. The idea behind this is I calculated how many miles it is from Uconn to Washington, D.C., and it was, I think, 368 miles. So for a round trip trip to Washington, D.C., under the old policies, we would not fund all the mileage. And I do, one of our policies on travel is to use the mode of transportation as the lowest cost, correct? So we want to just encourage groups that maybe are traveling with 10 people. It may be financially better for them to rent a van. I'm negotiating a new contract with Avis, side note. But it may be more beneficial to them to rent a van and do the travel or to use their own van than to fly. So that's the idea behind that.
Just as a note, there's like 2.5 minutes left.
All right. The next up is the therefore get resolved that talks about variances and appeals, which we'll talk about in a second when we scroll down. Then we have a clause that, not yet. We'll talk about when we scroll down. Then we have a clause that essentially tells the Chief Justice to, when he's curating the docs, to renumber and format accordingly, because we've added numbers and we've removed clauses, and so that it needs to happen. Changes the name of the document from the funding student staff and student organization policies to Tier 2 funding policies, because I think that's what everyone thought they were called before I just said their name. And I think it just kind of makes sense to call them that. And then finally, there's an update to the appeals board bylaw, which the Chief Justice and I developed a little bit after we talked about the variance and appeals policy. So now can we scroll down into the first highlighted section? Okay, so this kind of came from, if y'all remember during the comptroller election, we talked about how do we kind of get more money to the hands of Tier 2s, how do we help with with those things that are avoidable, and we kind of threw around the idea of, at first we were talking about second chance funding, and then we thought maybe there's a better way to do this, and it kind of gave birth to both the variance policy and the second chance funding policy. Essentially what this is here for variances is when groups submit a request, if they know ahead of time that it violates some particular policy. What they're doing is they're asking the comptroller to work with the funding stream staff supervisor to decide if, for whatever reason, they should be excused from that policy. And that's something that would happen before the vote, and then there's just a little bit to say what the comptroller needs to provide to the funding staff to effectively implement a variance.
How much?
Do you want to talk about variances or?
Oh, yeah, so the purpose behind the variances is, when I first got into this role, Aaron and I kind of made a bunch of exceptions to groups that requested them. So whether it was they missed a deadline because a family member was sick, like an extenuating circumstance, or they were invited to a competition within the 6-week deadline, those are the kinds of things why we have these variances, because we write our policies to be simple and easy to understand, but sometimes that the way those policies are written prevents groups from accomplishing their mission. So the point behind this is there will be an online form, and a group it'll be very detailed, but a group will have to explain, why their funding request is against the policy as written, and then they would request a variance. That would come to me, I would speak to the funding supervisor, we'd make a decision, and we get back to the group. And essentially the decision would be, hey, funding staff, this policy, blah, 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 whatever line number, do not consider this when considering the request. But all other applicable policies will be considered. So a variance is not a guarantee that funding would be granted. So that's that one.
Is that everything?
Second chance funding.
The second chance funding.
Okay, so the second chance funding we're calling comptroller's appeals. The way this is going to work is, let's say, it's really going to only be applicable when a group misses a deadline. So if they don't apply within the 6 or 8 week deadline, or if they miss the 3 business day return, instead of getting no funding and being really upset about that, they would be able to request a comptroller's appeal. It would be another online form, it would come to me, and correct me if I'm wrong. I would review the reasons for the comptroller's appeal, review the reasons for the request for the appeal, and then I would recommend the judiciary an up to amount not to exceed 50% of the funding that they would normally be entitled to. Then it would be up to the judiciary to make the decision whether to fund it at that amount. So it's just the idea is to get money to the groups instead of nothing if they make a mistake.
Yeah. Can we scroll into the last part there? And for this part, all right. This appeal, or the appeals board bylaw currently has a lot of language in it that refers to plaintiff and defendant, and who has, which roles to play. And so we, the Chief Justice and I kind of slimmed down that language a little bit to make it clear, to make this appeals process crystal clear. Because some groups were, going into the appeals process, reading this, and expecting something to happen differently from, the way that the procedure would actually work as, the bylaw was understood by USG judiciary. The only real functional change here is 3, which is highlighted there, and that is essentially to allow for the second chance funding. What that is it says that if the matter is financial, the comptroller can act as an additional party to the 2 above and submit a recommendation to the judiciary to kind of allow for that other process that we're putting in above.
All set? Yeah, no problem. Any questions? That was a lot. Go ahead. All right. Bill, Sophia,
Okay, so what exactly is the reason that you guys are shortening from lengthening from 6 weeks to 8?
Okay, so the reason why is because the funding staff basically requested this. If we move forward with the variance policy, put it this way, the staff shortages kind of invoked a little bit of fear in all of us. When we had one staff member, it was very difficult to get groups the funding that they needed, that they applied for in advance, let alone the couple of exceptions that we granted because of the staff shortages, to get those through as well. So we anticipate having a large number of variances just by the couple, the 20 or so exceptions that we've granted during my time here. That's not advertised to the public. So the whole point of the variance policy is to advertise that groups can ask for an exception instead of just catering to those couple that know that the squeaky wheel gets oiled. So because they said something, they get the exception. So because of that large volume of variances that we anticipate having, we're asking groups that can submit their funding 8 weeks in advance to do so. So some groups that we deal with, they basically outline their entire semester worth of funding in their informational budget. That's how well they plan ahead. Other groups can't necessarily do that. So for a group that can't plan that well in advance, they can either submit a skeleton funding request, essentially 8 weeks in advance, or request a variance to the 8-week policy. So the variances protect groups that can't submit 8 weeks in advance from not getting funding. Does that answer your question?
Sophia? Yeah, no? Okay. Luis? Yep, you're up.
My question is, on the most basic level, what do the funding student staff and town builders office believe that this will do to the volume of requests and the amount of money that we're spending? Is this a sustainable policy that we can have for the next 3 or 4 years?
So as of today, we have spent $511,000 worth of funding in Tier 2 funding. We budgeted $650,000 this semester. So we're near the end of the semester. Most requests have been processed. It's not going to increase by much. It's certainly not going to hit $650,000. We also don't think that there's hundreds of thousands of dollars worth of potential variances, because a lot of the variances are going to be for things that people applied for already, we think, and either requested exceptions for, or we just worked with them. We don't anticipate having this new volume of requests that are only getting funding because of variances, because a lot of the policies that we cannot bend are like higher level policies. So a variance could be given for not being able to apply within the 6 or 8 week deadline. It could be for 2 RSOs sharing the same accommodation, because we dealt with that once before. But because their rosters don't exactly match, because the people in the house don't actually match the roster on the request, technically it's against policy. They could request a variance for that policy so that 2 RSOs could save money by staying in the same accommodation. So it's things like that. So no, we do not anticipate this being unsustainable. I think, like I said, given that only $511,000 has been spent this year, this semester on Tier 2 funding, I think it would be sustainable. And yeah.
Yeah. Is that a question? I think that you're already on the question. That's good. Senator Reynolds.
I think an important stakeholder that we will have to consider making this decision is the student groups, especially because all those policies and how to deal with these policies. With that being said, have you gotten feedback from any of those presidents and treasurers, the student groups as positive or negative? How have they, viewed, especially the people?
So we held 2 town halls. I think the first one was really about this, but it came up during the second town hall. So we gave 2 opportunities for groups that were announced in advance to come and speak. Yes, groups have voiced, I've gotten emails concerned about the 8-week deadline. Groups have voiced their concern about the 8-week deadline, but I would say the majority of negative feedback that I have gotten about the 8-week policy has been because it's like a fundamental misunderstanding of what it means. So they think that because if we implement this policy, that now since they didn't apply for funding this semester 8 weeks in advance, that they're not going to get it next semester, so that they would be penalized by the implementation of this policy. That is false, and I have explained that to every group that has contacted me about that. Another concern was how the variances would relate to the 8-week deadline, whether they would be able to request a variance for not being able to meet the 8-week deadline. The answer to that is yes. So it seemed that from the town halls that once all of that was explained to the groups, that they were receptive to the idea of the 8-week deadline, at least more so than they were previously. Because the whole point is for groups that can, for groups that plan out their funding a semester in advance during their submission of the informational budget, they would be asked to submit 8 weeks in advance, and that's not asking much of them because their requests are basically planned out already. For groups that can't, they are protected by the variance policy. So once we've explained that, they've been more receptive.
Next on the list is
So because we fund with undergraduate student fees, everything that we fund, we want to benefit the most undergraduates. So we consider networking events to really benefit individual people. We want events to benefit the entire undergraduate community. Like conferences and stuff are totally fine because people can take that information and disseminate it to the undergraduate community. But like when you're going to network and you're going to get a job or you're going to get an interview or this, that, or the other thing, you're really just benefiting yourself, and that's not our goal here at the undergraduate student government. So that's the reason behind that.
So after somebody applies for a second chance funding, and the comptroller gives the recommendation and goes to the judiciary, it's up to them to make decisions as to how much they want to fund it up to 50%. What is the judiciary base that on? I guess what information do they have to lower that amount, make a decision other than 50%?
What?
So in section E, scroll up, please. Or excuse me, scroll down. So second chance funding will be one of the reasons for an appeal. So if you look at the appeal process, it's going to be exactly the same. So that's where, the judiciary is going to make a decision, but the judiciary always makes a decision based on input from both the appealing party and the responding party. Second chance funding is just going to be another reason for potential appeal. So nothing's going to change in the appeal process.
next is Gina.
Hi, so 2 questions. The first one would be, are you expecting to cap the variances either by the number you get per semester or by the amount you spend? And then if like a certain type of variance is common enough that you get the request, are you expecting to add it to like the policy with either type of company or something else? Like let's say amount for like a trip that's comes up or something like that.
So, to answer your first question, no, there will not be a cap on the variances per RSO. There is a cap on the second chance funding request. The times it can be granted, it can only be granted twice for second chance funding. So you'll have 2 mistakes per semester for an RSO. The variances, you can request an unlimited number of variances theoretically, and the whole point of that is because the variances are to ensure that you can follow your mission, and that our policies do not prevent you from doing so. So if they do prevent you from doing so, we want to make sure that we bend them as necessary so that you fulfill your mission. For your second question, I appreciate that question because I do look at the variances as a way, almost like it's data. At the end of the day, the amount of variances that are granted and requested for are a form of data. And yes, we will absolutely take into account if a certain policy often comes up in a variance request, we will absolutely consider whether that policy needs to be changed. And the way I am, I would probably bring it forward to be changed.
Thank you.
Well, if I could. So if this is passed tonight, first thing is I'm in contact with a daily campus reporter who wants to know how this goes tonight. So that would be one way the message gets out. And I will absolutely send out an email by the end of this week to all RSO officers informing them of the changes. They've received multiple emails from me about the town halls. They've received the draft of these policies. They were invited to come speak during public comment at Senate tonight a couple weeks ago. So I've disseminated the information as much as possible and will continue to do so.
Next up is Deputy Speaker Allen. Deputy Comptroller Allen.
So I have a question and potentially a follow-up about second chance funding. So the first part is, if I'm not mistaken, like, second chance funding is if you miss a deadline, right? If you miss your opportunity. Okay. So doesn't, like, section 3A2 kind of contradict that?
So the part of the variances is that in order to qualify for a variance, I think it says that you must demonstrate all of the following: that if the variance is missing for a missing deadline, that the RSO made reasonable efforts to meet the deadline. So that's like an extenuating circumstance. So if you have a request and it's clearly planned out, but just didn't submit it on time, and you can document why you didn't submit it on time, you would qualify for a variance. Sometimes groups just miss the deadline really without reason. Sometimes we get requests 3 weeks from the date of the event with absolutely no explanation as to why it was submitted 3 weeks late. So for things like that, it would go to second chance funding, and in 3 weeks it would be unlikely that it's funded anyway. But that's the core difference, is that variances for deadlines would be extenuating circumstance. Family member was ill, death in the family, or like something out of your control, like you were invited to a competition within the deadline. Whereas second chance comptroller's appeals would be to basically made a mistake.
Yeah, I also want to point out the variance system is it's as the comptroller pointed out, it's a protection for groups, whereas the second chance funding is not a protection, that's a penalty, right? You did the request wrong, or you messed up in some way, and you can't document why you did that. Because of that, the funding staff said, we're not going to fund your request, right? But USD, through this process, might fund you at up to half of what you were eligible for, because although you missed your request and it wasn't extenuating, or you didn't apply for a variance, USD believes that that request should still be funded for, or the comptroller, the funding supervisor believe that that request should still be funded for whatever reason, but because you messed up, you're only getting half. So there's a bit of a penalty in there, and that's just not true about the variances.
Just one more thing to that I think I neglected to highlight. So the variances would need to be requested at the timing of submission or beforehand. Once you submit that request, you're no longer eligible for a variance because the funding, right? Do I have that right? It may be up until it's voted on, but once the request is voted on, they don't go back on a vote. That's when it goes to second chance funding. So like Damani said, like the External Affairs Chair said, variances are protection. They happen beforehand. They happen when you know it's going to be a problem. Second chance funding occurs after the funding staff have voted on it and it's in the minutes and it's denied. Then it's eligible for second chance funding, but not a variance.
Next is so I guess kind of going off of that. So the group submits it in 8 weeks, and then let's say they're like club sports is making a request to submit during week 6 or 5, and they can't submit a variance, or they have to submit a new request.
So if they're invited to a new competition, it would require a new funding request anyway. But if they were invited to a competition within the 8-week deadline, they would submit a variance with the request, and they would say, hey, here's the email that we were invited to the competition within the 8-week deadline, and have the date there. Easily qualify for a variance and it would move forward. Where variances would not be granted is when the event really gets close, or the funding request really gets close to an event, like I would say around 2 to 3 weeks, then it just becomes impossible to process on our end, especially if it's a large funding request.
And my second question, so this was as a protection when we're understaffed, does having a larger staff affect, I guess more understaffed, does having a larger staff like negate some of the work that was pressure this semester, or is this something that could be beneficial with the full staff still?
I think it'll still be pretty beneficial just because just from the 2 weeks that we opened spring 2020 funding, we have had the most number of requests I've seen in my 3 semesters being here. And so I think that that is only going to continue. And I think that this, if this is passed, variance is passed, if we can pass, I think this will be something that groups will continue to, will find helpful to them. Because I feel like a lot of people are deterred from applying for funding when they're like, oh, I missed a deadline. Like, is there even any point for it anymore? And now there is a point.
Next is maybe chief staff. All right. Are there any further questions? I think we've exhausted the list. All right. Thank you. You all just may sit now. We're going to move into discussion. Staff, Dodson. Thank you, Chief of Staff Harmon, Senator Toscano.
Okay. So I think that there's something to be said about the stability and the funding policies. When you have an RSO president or treasurer, who are the two primary responsible parties for requesting USG funding, a lot of times they are in the role for multiple years or at least multiple semesters, right? So they kind of know what to expect. And I think that when we allow for something like variances to this extent, I think we run into the problem of having a RSO who, for whatever reason, applies for funding, doesn't get it, and then files for a variance, to then get it one semester, and then the next could very, very well likely say, well, I'll be late again, or I'll do the same mistake again, because I'll just get another variance. But say the next comptroller isn't as friendly to that specific kind of variance as the previous one was, then that RSO is then, for lack of a better term, screwed, right? And then they'll have to just apply for another variance through that through the new comptroller. So it seems that in introducing the variances, we're introducing variances to make it easier on student groups. But those variances make it harder on the staff. So then we have to introduce an 8-week deadline, which then makes it harder on the students and easier on the staff. And then, because it's harder on the students, they're covered by the variances. So it seems like stealing from Peter to pay for Paul, for stealing from Paul to then pay for Peter again. It seems like this is a contrived need rather than a demonstrated one. And it's creating a problem. To me, creating a problem, then addressing the problem with the solution being the original problem, and then it's just a self-propagating cycle. I would just ask you to keep that in mind when discussing these. Everything else in this bill, I like just the variances and the 8 weeks. I think it's too much.
Similarly to Walter, and speaking as a Tier 2 officer, I have grave concerns with the 8-week deadline for funding policy or for funding approvals. Already, this is one of the things we struggle with most as a student group on campus. Getting people to understand even why it's 6 weeks as it is. Groups want it shorter already. And it's very difficult to meet that. Adding the variances, to me, is complicating the process for student groups, even though it's intended to streamline it and make it easier for them to receive funding. Additionally, it seems as though, with kind of the argument that we are understaffed, but we are working to build that staff back. It seems like we're now putting that our issues onto the students, who we should be making it as easy as possible.
Senator Scott?
Hi, everyone. Thank you very much. I have to agree with the Vice President's Chief of Staff. I do believe that we shouldn't implement a policy based on the fact that we are currently understaffed. For that reason, I think that we shouldn't also look to increase the opportunities for undergraduate students. And I think that for that reason, that variances and the second chance policy are wonderful policies. They, as the comptroller said, may not have a very large effect, which I'm a little bit more concerned about that aspect of it. But overall, I think that if we want to do the best thing for students, we keep the deadline where it is and we implement these policies. I know that right now that will be hard on our staff, but I think in the long run it's the best thing for the undergraduate students, and that's what I think that we should be here for. My main concern with this funding update is the sustainability. I'm not sure if we could sustain variances and second chance appeals on a macro level. This is adding in what I might think, and I could be wrong because I don't have the numbers, could be a massive reoccurring expense for the undergraduate student government. It's increasing the amount of funding that we're sending to Tier 2s, and if we're going to do that, we may have to ask for a fee bill increase in the foreseeable future. Based on the trends of the data that I've seen in the past several years of SBAC reports, that is likely going to be the reality, whether or not we do these policies. Overall, I think that this is great for the students, and it really increases the ability of the students to get the money that they're paying us to give them. They're essentially paying us this $45 every semester so that we can allocate money that they can use. And I think that this is a great way to allow for that to happen in ways that it's never happened before. The only issue that I take with it is the 8 weeks and the possible sustainability. Thank you very much. I yield.
Next on the list is Senator Shep. You can make a motion.
I'm going to motion to amend out the extension back to 6 months.
Okay. So would you like to remove the entire clause, or say that the deadline is 6 weeks?
But this makes sense.
We'll get to speak in a second.
Remove the entire clause, because all they're doing is 6 to 8.
Okay, all right, so the motion is to remove the clause regarding the 8-week deadline, which would therefore leave it at 6 weeks. Is there a second to that motion? Second goes to Reynolds. All right, I'm going to invite the, sort of motion up, and then I will invite the student staff supervisor.
Housing and
Okay, so my one issue with this, and if Comptroller Sakamoto thinks it's necessary to take out variance and approve this, I'm totally okay with that. But I have been helping 2 different student groups in their funding policies. 6 weeks is already really hard to deal with. Making 8 weeks would make it really, really difficult for student groups to make sure they get the funding in time. I understand wanting to have groups get their funding in earlier if they can, but that's a conversation you can have with group by group. That's not the kind of thing you have to make a blanket kind of rule for. I think that 6 weeks is already a long time. I understand why it has to be 6 weeks, but it's already a long time. 8 weeks is way too long. It's going to make it even more difficult for student groups to get the funding that they need to do what's best for students. So I do agree with I'm not going to put titles. I agree with Walter and Brady. I think it's best for citizens. And if Comptroller Sakamoto thinks that we need to remove variances and trying to deal with that, then I think that's another change.
Hi everyone, I'm so like the microphone. Yeah, I just want to really, really stress that if we take out 8 weeks, we gotta take out variances, because I just know that it is objectively not possible for my staff, who are 13 really diligent student workers who don't work full-time, they only work part-time in the office, and they work so hard to process every single request that comes through the system, and that if we have variances, we don't have 8 weeks, it isn't possible. So, I don't really know what happens now, but if this happens and the variances still happen, I'll just be really upset. So please don't do that. For my sanity, as a student, fellow student, just trying to fund some people. Thank you, all you.
You had your address. There is a speaker list now. The amendment to turn it back to 6 weeks. DJ, Fabio, do you still want to be on the speaker list?
For this, I'm going to defer to the folks who are going to be doing this, right? So Erin and her wonderful team, they're the ones who are going to have to implement this, right? So I really think we should defer to their judgment, as well as the comptroller, the folks who will be doing this, right? It's easy for us to say we should do 6 weeks, it's better. Ideally, yeah, ideally we do it in a week, right? But we're not living in an ideal world here. We're living in a very real world in which our students that live in our office and are paid by USG and work for USG, work so hard already, right? And we're asking a lot of them. So I'd simply refer to the judgment of Erin McConnell and Fabio Sakamoto, and they're saying that it's not possible, folks. I don't know what to tell you. I really think we should keep it in its original form. These folks did worked hard on it, they developed it, and they're doing the best for students too. And students are not benefited if the funding staff can't do their job with the rules that are given to them that are unfair. So if we really do want to fund students, we should be working with the funding staff, not changing their policies that we're sending. We can work with them, not saying we can't be critical, but I really think the judgment should be valued.
I'm also going to cap the list of people on the amendment. There are 6 now. So, next up is
So I totally understand Deputy Speaker Wurzler's concern, but listening to what Fabio said, it seems like the primary reason for having this 8-week policy is specifically for those groups who have their funding already planned out for the semester. And so if this is like a policy like for everyone, well then, you have that problem that Chief of Staff to the President, Walter, was talking about how, you have more requests for variances. So I do think that it should stay to 6 weeks, and, to tackle that problem of student groups already having their funding already laid out for the semester, just like encouraging them, like, I don't know, like in an email or something like that. Because again, I don't know who mentioned this, it seems like we're like changing the legislation for like a certainly particularly small group of student organizations that have their semesterly budgets already planned out. So I don't think that this is a good policy, for the entirety of the student organizations.
All right. Sarah, Dave.
I just more point of information. I'm about to ask a question. It's perfectly awesome. So, like, how did you guys come up with 8 weeks? Like, what made you decide that 2 weeks would be enough time? Like, was there any analysis done, or did you just say 2 weeks should be enough?
I will yield to whomever. Yeah.
So the 8 weeks came after we started talking about variances, because variances were being talked about before I even came to this role. So the idea is, we estimated it'll take around 2 weeks to receive a variance, to make a decision on a variance, and to get back to the group on that variance. Be around 2 weeks. We aim to make it as short as possible, but just in case, we wanted to give ourselves 2 weeks. So in order to do that, we extended it to 8 weeks, because essentially by the time the variances is done, it would still enable us to process the request in the 6 weeks that we normally do. So that's what we came up with the 8 weeks. I mean, I don't know if the funding staff supervisor would be amenable to reducing it down to 7. I don't want to propose that, but that's what the Senate probably wanted to do that. It's certainly something you can do, but I think we speak to her first. But that's what we got the 2 weeks.
Next is Councilor Zephyr.
So I just want to reiterate a couple of points here. First of all, whatever decision you guys come to, we respect and we appreciate your decision because you are the legislative leaders here. So we can only do our best to bring things forward that we believe wholeheartedly would be beneficial to the student body. And one of the reasons why we brought forward both the variances and the 8-week deadline, because we truly believe that that would be beneficial to the student body. I was a Tier 2 president for a year and a half. There were several times that I recall asking for some sort of exception to the policy, and the former comptroller at that time, whoever the comptroller was at that time, like 2 of them during my time, instituted the policies very strictly, at least in my cases. So the whole point of the variances is, for the group that is loud, for the group that comes into the office all the time, it is not fair that they get an exception because they asked for one, and that is not advertised to the public. So if we don't pass the variances tonight, Aaron and I will no longer be granting any sorts of exceptions. The only reason why we did it so far is because we knew that this policy would be brought forward, and we were hopeful that you would adopt it. As far as the 8 weeks goes, the 8 weeks was born really after the variances, but it is something that, given we fund around 300 groups, the amount of requests that we get is massive, and only people that deal with them can really understand, because I did not know ahead of time how many requests we get. So even though we have 15 funding staff, if we increase that to 20, we still couldn't get down that 6-week deadline. Now the reason why is because we eventually hit the top, other administrators that review those requests. So by spreading it out over 8 weeks, one of the things that we were hoping to accomplish is that they would have less of a stack of things to get through. So those things that needed to be rushed, those things that qualified for a variance, they would be able to go to the top of the stack without creating other strain on the other requests that met all the deadlines and everything else. So I truly believe that passing these policies together would be greatly beneficial to the student body. I would not bring it forward if I didn't think so. So the other thing is, if you pass 6 weeks without, and the variances, I just won't grant any variances. It's that simple, because the funding staff are very adamant they cannot be stretched by that. So I would, if you want to do 6 weeks, that is fine. just request that you take out the variances in addition to that. And regarding sustainability, like I said, we budgeted for $650,000 this semester. We're only at 511 as of today. This is totally sustainable. In fact, the budget that you'll see tonight, we have $30,000 more in our rollover than we did at the beginning of the fall 2019 semester. So we did not spend the money that we allocated in the budget. So I have no concerns about sustainability right now because our rollover is growing. That's it. Thank you.
Next on the list, Senator Allen.
So it seems like to me the 8 weeks and the variances is just a way for the funding staff to do their job easier. And I think if they can do their job, that benefits all students. So I'd say like go with the 8 weeks, but then basically as soon as possible. I feel like we should all try to come up with a way so that a 6 week, like 6 weeks would work, or maybe even like shorter than that, and like maybe taking it to the administration so that like that time is as short as possible, so that the student groups can get enough time that they need. But for now, I think the 8 weeks would work for the funding staff to do their job most effectively.
Actually, before I'll cap the list there, but that does remind me of something, a piece of information that we have not been talking tonight about, and I do want to talk about. We've been talking about this paradigm specifically in the staff only being stressed in terms of personnel, but I also would like to take a moment and point out, and I will defer to the comptroller, the funding student staff supervisor on this, our funding system is, she just rolled her eyes as I said it, is incredibly out of date, like unable to handle the magnitude of requests that are coming through. And a lot of our difficulty to process that request isn't just going to be fixed by hiring additional staff, solely through remaking the system. Now, to the best of my knowledge, we're currently working on that problem, but that's gonna take time. So when you go forward and to make your decision, just make it with that paradigm in mind as well. That being said, we're now going to move into a vote. We're not going to use the online voting thing. We'll only use that for main motion votes. We'll just do amendments, voice, and hands if necessary. All those in favor of removing the therefore clause and returning it to a 6-week deadline, please signify by saying aye. All those opposed, please signify by saying nay. Any abstentions? 1, 2, 3, 4. In the opinion of the chair, the nays have it. The motion fails. All right, we're back to consideration on the motion as a whole. Is there any? There was a speakers list. Senator Lou, you're up. This is the bill as a whole. Legislation. Can you stand up and?
Cultural sustainability of this, and I just want to look at it
There's been a lot of talk about the sustainability of this proposed bill, and I just want to say, like, we have a massive rollover each semester, and as the comptroller mentioned, like, even with this, we have an even growing rollover, so I really don't want anybody to consider that too heavily as they vote on this motion. So, that's all.
President
People can comment, I just feel like everyone should be able to vote as a public, whoever is a part of that whole
All right, so first I want to thank Chairperson Douglas, Finance Staff Supervisor Uconn, and Comptroller Sacramento for all the work that they've put into this piece for the last few weeks. Thank you for your work. But I do have a few concerns with this that I would like to talk about. I think everything besides the variance and the 8-week deadline are great. and it definitely helps student groups. So first of all, you don't want to change a system that's not broke, right? It's not broken. We have our 6 weeks, and with the 6 weeks, we've been running airtight. There are processes besides our staff shortages have been productive, and students are very aware of the 6 weeks since we've been having it for so long. And I think that having the variances as a whole is a great idea, but again, it puts a lot of burden on the staff. And for example, even if a student group is able to get funding within 3 to 6 weeks, right? That's still going to put a lot of stress on the staff. So the 8-week deadline does not work for all cases per se, if that makes sense. And then, as the past comptroller, the one biggest thing and complaint that I always received from students is our 6 weeks. Putting it to 8 weeks will be extremely detrimental for students, and I think that they will have a harder time with their own funding and processing their requests. And yes, then they can submit a variance, but then it goes back to, is it needed in the first place if we just remain our system as a whole and keep the 6 weeks and don't do variances? So just from a student perspective, I have been an RSO leader. I'm not sure how many of you have as well, but it is extremely difficult to plan your events 2 months in advance. It's very hard. You have to think about catering, event spaces, and thus I definitely recommend not to go through the 8 weeks or variances as a whole. And lastly, I think that how many exceptions can we make, right? And I think that the variance as a whole is very subjective and is determined by who is the comptroller or the funding staff supervisor at the time. And the way we process our requests now allows for the lack of subjectivity, which is definitely important in any business organization that one must run. That's just my say.
Next, we have funding information and then.
How do you feel having a 7-week deadline plus variances versus a 6-week deadline without variances?
You could give me 2 minutes to consult with the funding staff supervisor. I'll give you that.
Your amendment?
Okay, so I have an amendment, but I first want to take a second to explain it. So what we've heard from the comptroller and the funding staff supervisor is that we need 8 weeks. That's the amount of time they need. And we've also heard that if we do 6 weeks, which we've already said is something we don't want to do, we just voted against that they won't get variances, which defeats the purpose of variances as a whole. Yeah, they're going to be in there, but not going to grant any of them because the timeline's too short. So, as a nice way to appease everybody, an option here could be to keep it at 8 weeks, which we have already as a whole agreed to do because we did not accept that amendment, and then remove the acceptance of variances for under 6 weeks. So there'll be no variances for timelines. If you apply for funding under 8 weeks, you'll be eligible for second chance funding, which will go to the judiciary, but we won't allow for variances for timelines if you miss it. That will go to second chance funding, which is already which is already better than what we do now. Variances will stay in this, which will allow us to fund things that we couldn't otherwise fund before, that functionally should be funded, but USG policy restricts us from doing it right now. So we can satisfy everybody by keeping the variance policy in, and keep the 8 weeks in, and remove variances for any time restrictions to appease everybody. So, with that being said, keep the 8 weeks, but I'd like to add a caveat for the variances, to restrict variances for timelines.
Scroll down to, I believe it's in the bottom.
Excuse me, I'm sorry. I would like to change it to the 6 weeks deadline, which we have, but remove variances for deadlines. So a deadline won't be the missed deadline won't qualify for variance. So we get to keep our 6 weeks, I misspoke, excuse me. We get to keep our 6-week deadline, which we already like, but we don't have to worry about variances that fall under the 6-week deadline. So if you apply for 4 weeks, as an example, you won't get a variance. That'll be applicable for second chance funding, which is better than what we have now. But it'll take that stress off of these funding staff supervisor for under 6 weeks. So we get to keep our 6 weeks. And we get to grant variances for funding for things that should be funded reasonably, but we can't right now. So we get to keep variances, we get to keep our 6 weeks deadline, and we take the stress off the funding staff supervisor by not allowing for variances for missing deadlines. A little bit of something for everybody.
We just added the end of A, just. B is about like how you qualify for it, A is about what the variances will be granted. Just variances will not be granted for this test. From a higher authority or from a deadline, like three weeks. At the end of A. So variances will not be issued for funding policies that are delegated from a higher authority or this deadlines. I just read what was there. So after authority or this deadline.
Yeah, we'll just get rid of number 2, because number 2 explicitly says something about it.
No, but otherwise they can still get the deadline variance. So you have to limit as well. Yeah, you have to do both.
All right, so we get rid of 2, and then we say comment. Higher authority. What was the language again? Or for missing deadlines?
Yes. Correct. Right, we also have to change that deadline to 6 weeks, not 8.
That's what we're
Thank you.
All right, is there a second to this motion? Second goes to Toscano. The authors do not take it as friendly. We're going to move to discussion. I'm going to invite the author of the legislation to come up.
I think he justified it well, and I speak as to why I yeah. So yeah, here's the thing, right? The first idea and conception around the variance policy was if you get invited to a competition 5 weeks before the competition happens. This sentence now means that you're out of luck. So I do see where we're going with this, but this here, and we do anticipate the majority of variances to be granted at that deadline, especially with, so long as we still have 8s and things like club sports and competitions, you frequently find out 4, 5, sometimes 6 weeks in advance. This clause here kind of takes the point out of what we try to do with variances. So that's why I'm doing something.
Point of information.
Would second chance funding still apply for that then, under this?
Okay, yeah, second chance funding would, but there's like two things with that. One is if you then get invited to 3 competitions in a semester 4 weeks before the deadline, you wouldn't fund the third. So you can only get 2 second chance funding appeals during a semester. And the other thing is those are capped at 50%. So as opposed to right now, you can get a variance and get 100% of whatever that thing was covered. If it goes to a comptroller's appeal, you're capped at 5 and no more than 2. So, sorry, capped at 50% and you don't get more than 2.
So just now I'm going to cap the list.
So, I'd just like to quickly respond to a number of Chairperson Douglas's points. I think that what this does is better than what we have already, but allows funding student staff to function. I think that before we pass any of this,
they wouldn't have gotten any money for those events. But now we can have 6-week deadline, which was, as the President Thacker said, the primary complaint from students. And we also allow for some funding to go to these events. It may not be as much funding as we'd like to have go to it, but it will be within, hopefully within the capacity of the funding student staff. Thank you very much. I would hope that everyone votes yes on this amendment.
All right, we're going to move into a vote on this amendment. All those in favor of the amendment, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All those opposed?
Nay.
Any abstentions? 1, 2, 3. In the opinion of the chair, the ayes have it, and the motion carries. So that means that, just give us a second. So the deadline has been moved back to 6 weeks, but variances will no longer be able to be granted because of missing deadlines. Okay? Okay. Now we're back into discussion on the legislation as a whole. Is there anyone? Senator Toscano, you're on the speakers list for this.
No, I just spoke.
Oh, okay. Is there anyone for the legislation as a whole? Councilor Sacramento? All right. I also like 10 more minutes of this.
I just want to say thank you. I appreciate a compromise. I think that was very intelligent. I think that was a good idea. So thank you. My only concern is just that we're all on the same page. Groups were expecting to be able to get that waiver for the deadline because of competitions. A decent amount of groups get invited to competitions within the deadline, especially if they're moving from like semifinals to finals or whatever, quarterfinals to semifinals. You know, so the way this legislation is written now is those groups would not be able to be funded for those competitions. So I do agree it's better than nothing because not every variance that we anticipated granting was related to a deadline, but groups would not be able to qualify for things like finals, would not be able to have their finals paid for because of the way this is worded. Thank you.
You have a question?
Yeah. So, if this goes through, do you feel that this is something that your office can then handle within monitoring, seeing maybe how many groups are looking for that funding, the full funding for semifinals, finals, in the best sense? And then do you feel that this is a solid compromise and then something that you can also handle within your office of keeping track of?
If groups are not eligible to request variances for deadline issues, I don't think they're going to request them. So you may get the squeaky wheel that does request it anyway. It won't be granted, so I will be able to keep track of it in that sense, and I'm willing to do so. And you know, this is very fluid. So if we get a lot of that, maybe we bring this back to your attention and have a different deadline, or bring it up at 8 weeks again. My hope was that it would go forward with the 8 weeks, and we would reduce down from that if we felt like we could. All about that. But this is better than nothing, and I think it's great to move forward and see how it goes. Make changes if necessary.
I yield. Chairperson Jones.
Yeah, just to further elaborate on what the comptroller said. This also means that with the fairness for the deadline ahead of the vote from the funding staff, then as soon as the staff votes, the check is processed, right? What's going to happen now is, assuming that the group wants to take the second chance funding route, they will apply. Their request will be voted down, and then they have to go into the appeals process. The judiciary has to issue a ruling. After, I think there's a 6-day window for appeals, or 5 days from the Chief Justice. So that's an extra work week. And then the judiciary issues a ruling, and it goes back to the staff to be processed. So there is an extra kind of week created there on the back end, which seems similar to the week created on the front end by the variance for this, but it's not really similar on the processing side.
Yeah.
Is there a possibility to include a clause within this current funding update bill to include, like, for deadlines, make a specific clause which states that if it's due to like some sort of competition which is time sensitive, for those specific ones to be awarded variances? Or
yeah, that's possible.
So
we'll leave it to the body to decide whether reference.
Can we motion for that potentially?
the motions technically do take precedence, so I'm gonna yield to the motion first. So the motion is that,
To include such a clause.
okay, so, give it a second. So it would be, the language, what would the language be? Just be another clause.
If it
Something
was
along the lines
a
of-
time-sensitive matter that like was not something that they could have found out before the 6 week.
An unforeseen time-sensitive matter?
Yeah. I guess essentially. I don't really know how to word it. Because if the comptroller or the funding provider could help. Maybe.
I would direct to C1 and see if that kind of gets at what the senator is trying to do here. Although
I would think that that grants sufficient leeway to give us our escape without having to make an amendment.
it's not my job to reference interpretation, but I would agree.
The document extenuating circumstances that permits the submission of a request by the respective deadline, that would be if you did that. So do you withdraw your amendment? Because do you find that language sufficient? If not, you still make your amendment.
Where is that exactly, sorry?
So that is C1.
Yes, I do withdraw.
Are those suggestions taken?
The parliamentarian account doesn't have access, so I'm working on taking them. Thank you, appreciate it.
But would that variance be denied because it's within 6 weeks or no?
Potentially, I don't know.
So,
Go ahead, what were you saying? Oh, go ahead, what's up? Is that a motion to do what? Okay, actually, hang on a second. Did you withdraw your amendment, or do you want to still do it?
I just wanted a clarification as to like if that still like doesn't allow for people who have competitions that they need to like enter. If they can't do that based off of the wording of this, then I would not want to withdraw my motion. But if it does, then I would.
I will yield to the Chief Justice.
So, can you repeat your question louder?
So essentially, like if someone had a competition or some event that they recently found out that they qualified for and they needed funding for, and that wasn't something they could have found out 6 weeks before, would they still be able to get funding with the new wording of the funding update, or no, they would not?
No, based on the amendment that was just passed, the addition of the words "or for missing deadlines" would prohibit that.
Okay, then I would keep my motion.
Your what?
I would not like to withdraw my motion. I don't know what's going on here.
Okay. Senator, do you mind restating, or so to be just we're on the same page here?
Okay.
You're keeping your motion.
I am keeping my motion.
Okay. And keep your motion. What exactly is the motion? What's the amendment?
I wanted to add I don't know the exact wording, but essentially something to this funding update, which states that if it's like for like some sort of competition or event that they couldn't have found out about 6 weeks before, that they could still apply for a variance.
I think that C1 is like that.
Yeah.
That because otherwise that can
Oh, if it's an advancement from.
It's not in the document, C1, but that is what I think that he was trying to do.
Competition. That specifically is for competition.
That is like CI is what I think is being considered at the moment, but I'm not certain.
That specifically is for competition.
Yeah. So,
Okay.
the problem, do you have something else?
Oh, sorry, I just wanted to make my wordings clear. So if it's specifically for an advancement from a preliminary competition, then that variances should still be applied if it's within 6 weeks, is what I essentially want to add.
Okay. I'll just make a point. If you want to include language like that, you are absolutely allowed to, but the verbiage of form may not be issued for missing deadlines prohibits your amendment. So if you want to work on both parts of it, then you can do that, absolutely. But,
Okay.
you know.
What is that?
I would want to work on both.
Point of what? Well, we're in the middle of one being interchanged right now, but are we? Okay. Hang on, no, we're gonna start over again. We're gonna pull back from everything. All right, everyone relax. Put your placards down. Down. Take your hands away from them for a second. Okay. All right, so what we're going to do is a little bit of confusion. All right, so what you're looking to do, Senator Thea, is add something that allows variances to be granted only in the case where competitions come up or only in unforeseen circumstances?
When competitions come up. Advancement from a preliminary round in a competition. And that would essentially also include making changes to C1.
My personal privilege, I cannot.
Sorry. Can I repeat that once more? I'm so sorry, I didn't have the mic on. So I essentially want to make it so that specifically to advancement from a preliminary round in a competition, and that would essentially also have to make me have to make a change to C1, because the wording of that specific portion of the document restricts the change that I want to make.
Technically, if we just add a clause that says something along the lines of missing competitions, applying for funding for competitions that could not have been foreseen will not count as missing deadlines, then we only need to put one clause in, and we don't need to, well, the wording can be fixed.
So the amendment that we just voted on and passed, C1 contradicts that amendment.
Yeah.
So C1 should have been amended with that original amendment, but was not.
Yes. Oh yeah, that is a problem. Yeah, hang on. I'm gonna motion by unanimous consent for a 5-minute recess. Everyone who's having these conversations, please come up here right now. Let's work this out so we can get this straight.
We're 5-minute recess to figure it out.
My laptop broke. Did your battery start to pop? I just got back from, or my computer broke. Yeah. No, not good. The battery started to crackle, and then it got hot. So I was afraid to yeah. I was afraid to put it like on the plane bag. So yeah, so that was fun. But then Pre was like, oh, I was like, so now with members appointed or elected by the students. Exactly.
We all dispersed. Getting rid of, still getting rid of C1? Still getting rid of C1? All right, everyone, get back together. We got this is great problem. There are still enough people present at the meeting. They might not be in the room, but they are here. Okay? I believe we have 29 on the nose. And Holly Ann, that's the magic number, so no one leave.
Stuart?
What? I may have. Shut up.
I didn't say anything.
Good point.
All right. She has a zero with me. So, all right. We're going to launch right back into it then. So the language is what we worked out here is about as good as it can be. So we're taking C1 out because what just happened?
Control C.
All right. Okay. So we're taking. Okay. So we're taking out C1 because C1 contradicted the top one. And we're adding something to the bottom that says variances for missing deadlines may only be issued if an RSO advanced from a prior competition. Okay. Is there a motion for this? I'm motion to Toscano, second to Barone. We're gonna. Is there any discussion on this? The amendment's taken as friendly. Are there any objections? No? All right, then it happens. Lovely. All right, thank you all for bearing with me doing that. Now we're back in discussion on legislation as a whole. Wrap it up. I'll leave it at that. Is there an amendment? All right, there's a motion to the previous question. Is there a second?
Second.
Second goes to Frank. This doesn't have any debate. All those in favor, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All those opposed, please signify by saying nay. Any abstentions? In the opinion of the chair, the ayes have it, motion carries. We're not going to move to a vote. We're just not even going to try the online voting system tonight. Sorry, guys. It's such a mess. We're now voting on the legislation as a whole. Okay. All right. All those in favor of the legislation, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All those opposed? Any abstentions? Chair. And it's 2 from the 3 senators who left for the bathroom. In the opinion of the chair, the ayes have it, and the motion carries. All their stuff's here, so I'm assuming they're still here. Now we're going to move into the next item of business, which is the Peers Act. Is there a motion? Motion goes to Collins, second goes to Mosley. I'm going to step down for this because I am presenting it. All right, I'm going to launch right into this pretty quickly. So what this is the Peers Act. Peers, Monty came up with the name. It's planned to enhance and encourage representation in Senate. This, as you've heard, gives ex officio senators voting rights, moves from 10 to 15 seats, and delegates them to additional organization and names them out specifically. All 5 of the cultural centers are in there, the NACP, all 4 of the Greek councils, Subog, just a couple others. I'm sure you can read it. You know, they're all filled. It's just generally to get more people into the organization and make it so they, their organizations that they represent are part of USG and helping out the student body in general. Just making sure we can all collaborate together. I'll turn it over to Monty if he has anything.
Yeah, just a structural piece. You'll see there's, you can scroll down a little bit, just to see clauses 2, 3, 4, and 5. Those are just relocating those from they're currently in the election policies bylaw, and putting all of the Senate seats in the same bylaw, which I think kind of makes sense as opposed to leaving them strewn about. And then clause 5 is also a carryover from the election policies. It is the table that's used to determine which schools get how many seats. As an example, if a particular residence hall held 15% of the population of Uconn, it would be entitled to 5 seats, and you can see that on the table there. You'll have questions.
Any questions? Yes, Senator Allen.
I have a question. So I noticed that under the list of like ex officio seats, there are a bunch of like Greek organizations in there. So I was wondering, as an alternative to having these be ex officio seats for the leaders, why wouldn't we just give at-large seats to Greek members? Wouldn't that be a better way of representing our interests?
So the reason we did this preferred ex officio senators over elected seats in this case is, at least in my opinion, ex officio senators act as ambassadors from their organizations, which is generally a fundamentally different role than that of a pure power representative. I am a CLAS senator. Those interests of those members of my constituency are generally decentralized and very general, while the interests of FERG, for example, are much more centralized and rigid. And that's not necessarily bad one way or the other, but in terms of increasing collaboration between groups of students on this campus, we thought it was prudent to increase collaboration with the groups on campus who are active in these issues, who are involved in all of these discussions already, and then bringing them to our table so we can expand this university's representation.
Any other questions? Yeah, in the back.
So, does
don't you think that might be an issue that some of these organizations may consist of graduate students as well? Like,
They wouldn't be able to serve in the organization. You have to be an undergraduate at the University of Connecticut at Storrs to be a member of the undergraduate student government.
so I'm just saying though, like, the people that are voting in the people who will be represented here, like, because some of these organizations consist of graduate students as well, wouldn't this be graduate students choosing senators for the undergraduate student government?
Which organization specifically?
I think Uconn has graduates.
No.
Or
Don't believe that they do. Most, all tier 3 organizations are only undergraduate organizations. Any,
The only undergrads have voting power in tier 3.
Do you think that there's a conflict of interest with having a student trustee as an ex officio? Like, I read, obviously, like, it's logical. Yes, we want our representative to the board of trustees to know the opinions of the undergraduate student body, but I feel like there's a reason why there's a trustee role and why there's USG. I just want your thoughts on that.
Yeah, totally fair. I'll note a few things. The first is it was relatively common when we went to Costco to talk about the structure of student government. It was relatively common that both trustees were there as part of the student government and that they're incorporated into that. So it's not an uncommon thing to see. Our thought process here was they are elected by the same constituency as the president, comptroller, and vice president, and they're accountable to the same group of people. The things that they are talking about are valuable to the people in this room and to executing the mission of the undergraduate student government, and that they can bring knowledge and connections in a way that the average residential academic MCD senator or ex officio wouldn't have. And so bringing them closer to USG, we think, can only benefit USG.
Point of information. From my understanding, are undergraduate trustees able to participate in any regional campuses?
Yes, and that is something that we will, once we move into discussion, amend to clarify that that is, it's already there?
Sorry, take care.
Yes, so take a look at 1AI. In the case with undergrad trustee, it's not a Storrs undergraduate, they should retain speaking rights and not voting rights. So in this case, should the trustee be from the Harvard campus, we still want them to share their opinions, but we can't let them vote because this is USG Storrs.
I'd also point out that, like, I would encourage, if I had conversations with the other USGs, them to do the very same thing. And as those communications begin to get better, as they already are, I will be pushing for the same thing. I think it's important that this happens on all levels. But I think it's not like we should be the first ones to take it.
Yes, as it applies to the attendance of the trustee, because in their job requirements, attendance at the undergraduate student government senate is not a requirement. If they don't come, or if classes preclude them from coming, will it still be up to the discretion of the speaker whether or not they can remain in the body?
So the way this is written, generally speaking, especially in regards to the trustee role, they hold those rights and they can't be stripped of them.
Okay.
So the undergraduate trustee can show up whenever and wherever they want. I would like them to avail them of this right as often as possible. But if they never show up, that's their prerogative and they can't be removed.
Also, I'll note for the sake of quorum there that in the standing rules of the Senate or the governing board, they can just, make clear that that person does not count against quorum, or should not count in the calculation of quorum.
Okay.
Senator Athena.
I just had a couple of questions in regards to, do you have a list of like numbers in terms of how many members make up each of the councils or like student organizations that we're proposing as ex officios?
No. But we're not.
Or like overall, how much of the Uconn population is made up of Greek lists by any chance?
I yield to the vice president.
For Greek lit, at least, it's 11%.
11%, okay.
So roughly 2,100 students.
Where it says that undergraduate students that aren't at scores retain speaking rights and specified not voting rights.
Yeah, actually, I think that would make sense, and once we get into discussion, I think we can make a motion so that will read, shall not have voting rights in these bodies. Okay.
So I may be misunderstanding this, please let me know my answer. Are we allotting 4 ex officio seats and therefore 4 ex officio votes to Greek-like organizations? And if so, what is the
You are not mistaken. The reason behind that is Greek life comprises a significant minority of members on this campus and is also very active within the campus community, both when it comes to philanthropy, other events. There's a lot of resources that come from there. There's a lot of people who know people through there and have connections to the undergraduate student population at large. Having those people in these conversations, especially as involved as they already are, we believe was important. And rather than have one person representing all of them when there are these 4 councils that, as I understand it, have very diverse interests and focuses, we wanted to give one to each.
Just to clarify that, each of those 4 councils is, the constituency is different, and they each have different cultural components from the others. Cultural and demographic components from the others. Yeah, Senator Howie.
Could you please provide a brief explanation as to why Subag specifically is included and not other COTs or Nutmeg or Wuss?
So PERG and SUBOG are included because overwhelmingly we collaborate in initiatives, mostly with PERG, but especially this semester with SUBOG as well. Not that Daily Campus and UCTV, of course, is not welcome to show up at our meetings as well as any of the other Tier 3 organizations, but given that the majority of the events we collaborate on, like our missions more closely align with organizations like SUBOG and especially PERG than they will with the Daily Campus. So that was the rationale behind those initiatives.
I'll also add that it would be a little weird for the Daily Campus to report on Senate while having a senator who is, a part of that story, right? Like, we don't regularly see the Daily Campus advertise for itself or report on itself, so that would be a little weird. That would be like having journalists voting in the U.S. Senate, right?
All right, we'll do 2 more questions here. So, Councilman Baptist.
So for the cultural centers, how will those appointments work? Like, how can you ensure that there's a fair opportunity for all students involved in the cultural center, whether or not they're a student worker?
So that process, by design, is entirely left up to the centers themselves. One problem I personally had with the ex officio seats as they used to be for many years was the fact that USG, both the Senate and the President, got to define representatives of these constituencies, and granted, the President's always deferred, of USG have always deferred to these organizations, but we also have much of our own stuff going on, and sometimes it takes, especially the Senate, a little while to get around to the confirmation of these nominees, and rather than us having to wait on us, I think it would be nice if they could go through their own process, they could choose their representative however they want, they could draw straws if they'd like. That's all up to them, and that was done intentionally. They do have to be an undergraduate student who pays fees here at Storrs, besides that.
Okay, last question? Yeah.
Could you explain what CSDs included, because I think it was
Yeah, so actually, it was yesterday, wasn't it? I went to, what was the name of the event? I apologize.
International Day for People with Disabilities.
International Day for People with Disabilities, and we had a very productive conversation that focused primarily around where the, what is the name of the seat? The diversibility seat would come from. Whether that would come, originally it was in the legislation as CSD. We had conversations with CSD and we had conversations with the groups that were there who represented those communities, and they unanimously felt it would be better to have a student group do that than a entity that is mostly in charge of providing resources rather than handling advocacy. So that was a change there, but the constituency is still the same. The idea behind it is still the same. We just changed
diversibility. Okay, so there are no more questions. We're now moving to discussion. Yeah, we're now moving to discussion. Would anyone like to speak on this motion? We'll do Lonnie.
So, I personally feel that this piece of legislation is a corrosion of our democratic policies here at USG. I feel it's not proper for another Tier 3 organization, which is independent of us, to have a seat here and vote upon decisions that are really our as undergraduate student senators, job to vote on. I also feel that there is an issue.
I also feel that there is an issue with, especially if we're going to have diversity and multicultural seats, which I definitely approve of, it just doesn't seem right to have a repetitive seat for their individuals' cultural centers. And then on top of it, you know, USG, I think we pride ourselves on it as being an independent organization that represents the student body. Each senator here has to do certain things to become senator, and if we're going to give these senator seats to these particular organizations, it undermines the people here who have gotten a petition to become senator and also have gone through the process of being voted in by a population that was deemed by the undergraduate student government. So I think that this either has to be amended or it has to be shoved off, just because this is just intrusive and it's a corrosive, and I can't even describe how undemocratic this piece of legislation is. Sorry. Yeah, thank you. Senator.
Yeah. Wait, point of inquiry?
Yeah.
So what's the actual definition of a ex officio seat, like as of right now? What is it?
As of right now. So the way ex officio seats work right now is they're non-voting. There's 10 of them. 7 of them are but 7 organizations, the 5 cultural centers, the Veterans Center, and PER all have what we call right of first refusal, which just means they get to ask, we have to ask them before we ask anyone else if they want the seats, or people to serve in those seats. And typically what's happened is they'll send somebody to the president presents their nomination, and they're confirmed by the Senate.
Okay.
So in regards to the repetition within the cultural centers, and like the cultural organizations, so as like the only multicultural and diversity senator, there is absolutely no way that I believe I can adequately advocate for all of the students that serve under the umbrella community. And I certainly don't believe that, for example, I can try as hard as I can, but I can't advocate for NPHC or IGC because I'm not in them, or ASAC or PERLEC as much as possible. So I do believe that each of those centers and those councils do definitely deserve their own seats to sit here and voice their opinions. And in regards to the other tier 3s having a voice, I think one thing is that we forget is like all of us in terms of tier 3s, we're all here for the students. So I don't think any tier 3s will come in here and advocate something that will go against their missions, in which all of our missions align in some type of way. And also, the next thing is in regards to them not having a election process as rigorous as ours. If we're being completely honest with ourselves, most of us were uncontested. You had to get 50 signatures and that's it. So I don't believe that there's much competition or injustice or undemocratic. I think this is a great way to get voices and also make sure that we're adequately voicing the opinions of everybody on campus.
Is that a point of motion? Yeah.
So is that a previous question?
Second.
A motion on the previous question.
Yeah.
So there'd be a motion with the previous question?
Yeah.
Okay. Do we have a second to that motion?
Second.
Second. We will now go to a vote.
Can we hear about the motion?
Yeah, so the motion was to move to the previous question, which means we're gonna, don't worry about that thing up there, basically just go to a vote. on the total motion. Yeah. If it passes, that is to say, right? So now we're going to vote on that. So if you vote yes, you don't want to talk about this, you want to go right into a vote. Right? If you vote no, means you do want to talk about it, you don't want to go to a meeting. So all those in favor of moving to the previous question, say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed, say nay.
Nay.
Division. Okay. All right. Okay, we heard a division here. So, so folks, if you want to split the question, please stand up. Right. So if you say aye, please stand up. Yeah.
So if you want to end debate, stand up.
Yeah. So if you don't want to talk about it and just want to go into vote, stand up. Okay. All. Okay. Yeah, okay. All those who said nay, please stand up. Oh, okay. Yeah, so that passes. Sorry, excuse me, it fails. It fails. Any abstentions? Abstentions. Apologies. Abstentions. Stand if you abstain. One? Yeah. So by a vote of, I believe it was 12 to 15 to 1, this motion fails. So we are still going to be chatting together. Okay, so next on the speakers list. Yes.
Yeah. Can we ask the room if anyone yields the speakers list? Is that a better idea?
So for the sake of brevity, right? So if you're on the speakers list and you want to be removed, please say so now. We'll get here in a reasonable time. And maybe I'll ask that in a few minutes when folks take it. Okay. Yeah, there you go. So folks, if we're here in the same conversation, right? Okay. Taking me off this list. Thank you for all our standing. Next up, Senator Shedd, you have the floor.
Okay, it's working. Okay, so I agree and disagree with both two previous speakers. I think that definitely the cultural groups should have votes, but I think that maybe we should consider taking votes away from, or not allowing the other seats to have votes. I think it's very important that we get the input of the cultural centers. I think they're probably maybe some of the most important opinions we have in the room, but I think that having votes from those other organizations may not be as necessary. I agree that we all have similar interests, but at the same time, I think there's a high chance that adding those 7 could end up skewing votes. And while I don't think it's necessarily undemocratic in nature, I do think it undermines a little bit of what the Senate's supposed to be about. So I think I'm gonna make a motion to remove, I guess, that bit, but keep the cultural centers having their votes. I think that's important. Beyond that, I think this is a great piece of legislation, and I think it's going to pass pretty easily.
Was that a motion?
Or
are you going to meet?
Sure, yeah.
Yeah? Okay. Do you want to state your exact amendment for me, please?
I'd love to. Motion. No, I don't have to think about it. Can you come back to me so I can think about it?
Most certainly.
I think you want all of A, and then diversibility out of B, is what I think you're looking to do, to remove.
No, because I want to keep them as ex officio seats.
Oh.
Yeah.
Okay.
I'm going to have to think about it.
Okay. So, what Shed's thinking?
So it's A, anti-visibility?
What?
No, he's not making.
He's not sure yet.
Okay, we're gonna not chat back to what I think. Okay, next up, Colleen, please. Senator Miller.
Hello, everyone. So as an ex officio senator, I represent PERG, if you don't know. I have a few things to say on this. I think that this is a wonderful piece of legislation. First, voting rights will encourage engagement. I think it's pretty disheartening to see that myself and the Veterans Affairs ex officio senator are usually the only two that show up to these meetings and talk and do stuff in USG. I think that hearing from other organizations is really important. Another thing I had to say is, just because we give these seats to organizations does not mean that it's not an election within those organizations. As representing PERG, I had to put my name out there. We all voted on me in a meeting. It's not just like automatic. Also, nothing is stopping you all from joining another Tier 3 organization and becoming a voting member of it. You could join PERG if you wanted. You could be a voting member if you come to court. And yeah, I think that's it. I would love to see engagement from more organizations within USG, and I think this legislation encourages that, so please support it.
Senator Collins, go for it.
So I want to echo the sentiments of Senator Villani. So while I fully support this effort to diversify USG, obviously it's needed, look around this room, I do have a couple of concerns with this. Why appoint all these seats instead of encouraging people to run for Senate for their college/residency and represent the demographic they're a part of? For example, like let's take Eco-Husky. If they want a seat because they want to have a voice in environmental issues, where do we draw the line of just giving out these seats to organizations that want to have their voice heard on a specific issue? Where does it end? What about like religious groups, club sports, intramural sports, other things that weren't up there, like who want to advocate for their specific interests? Where do you draw the line, at just giving away a free Senate seat versus encouraging people to run for Senate, because that's what you should just do.
Okay, thank you.
Sorry, so I completely love the idea of ex officio seats being becoming voting members, but I do have a couple of concerns in terms of how the process would work. As we senators have been voted for our residential or academic seats, I feel that maybe perhaps they should also, and Senator Keller mentioned that that they did have a voting, but the wording of the current legislation doesn't allot for it says that they're being chosen by their organization, but it could just be the president of the organization electing them, or it could go to a vote, but we don't know. So I believe that it should be a general vote by anyone that is affiliated with that organization. So how the Infraternity Council has members in their organization, or ASAC, or any organization has members within the organization, they should do as a vote as we do for residential and the academic seats, is how I feel about the issue. But I do love the idea of more representation, because I do, as Senator, sorry, I'm screwing up last names, Villani and Rita said, we do, and not everyone can represent everyone, and more diversity is needed within USG Senate.
So I think that there's the Veterans Affairs Senator,
and I think that there's a big difference between giving a vote to organizations on campus who don't necessarily feel represented by the people here in this room, whether or not they're part of the CLAS or what have you, because there's certain people that, I'm sorry, but they're not represented here. They don't feel represented here. And I think there's a difference between that and giving votes to large organizations that are looking out more for the interest of the organization rather than the students in which they represent. That's really all I have about you.
Thank you, Mr. Gibson. Next up, we have Douglas.
Thank you. I have a few thoughts on this. So first of all, I'd like to echo a little bit about what the senator before me said, and that the goal here is to try to get as many different voices in this room as possible. And I think that part of that is reaching out to other large organizations that we work with on a regular basis, and those that we don't. We don't frequently work with Greek Life. We should be bringing them in here so we can address their issues. As for the question about these seats being undemocratic in some way, all of those groups have, to become their president, it's not just you name yourself and that's that. Right? There's a process you have to go through to become the president of those organizations. The ones below, we felt like we could not tell them how they should be represented. We, in USG, I don't think we have any right to tell the students in ASAC how they should be represented and who amongst them is worthy to be their representative and cast a vote to represent that constituency. So I absolutely think that the question as to is this democratic is a moot question entirely, because what this is about is
how do we hear the voices that we're not currently hearing? And that's the point of this legislation. And how do we hear it in a way that values both their voice and their opinion? Because I'll take Colleen as an example. Colleen can come up here and tell us about how great PERG is, but if we are voting on something that concerns PERG and we don't ask her for her vote, how much do we really care about what she has to say? And I think that's what this is about right here. I'll yield.
Senator Reynolds.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm sorry, I turned it off. I advocated against that, but I didn't.
All right, thank you, Mr. Speaker. I just want to draw attention back real quick to the section about having the undergraduate student trustee serve as an ex officio on the governing board. I have two issues with this. One is more of based on the role of the trustee, and another is just on the language of this bill. Basically how this structure works is USG and the University Senate are two of the biggest advocacy bodies here at Uconn. We pass on decisions that we advocate to administrators and in some cases the Board of Trustees. The Board of Trustees makes these decisions. I see a potential conflict and I think we should consider people who are the decision makers of this university, specifically the student representative, sitting in an advocacy body, that could potentially conflict with their role there. The other issue I have is the notion that we can give a vote to an undergraduate student trustee that comes from STORS, but not an undergraduate student trustee that comes from any other of the 4 branch campuses. I think this sends the wrong message to Avery Point, Waterbury, Harvard, and Stanford that their voice is only as, or they don't have as much of a voice as a STORE student would on the government. So I think we should consider removing that or making it, only speaking rights for the undergraduate student trustee. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator.
I think that we just want an undergraduate student trustee, but I'm not positive.
I understand there's a concern
Just so that's all. No one here
for academic
It's all undergraduate applications.
Which, yeah, I think his point was that folks from branch campuses can still be student trustee. You can run for student trustee of all, not just the STORs. Okay, great. Yes. Rodriguez.
Hello? Okay. So I'm going to keep it kind of casual because there's a lot going on. I do hear a concern that sounds like people are worried that random people are just going to come in here and advocate for these certain groups, but one, the process is not random. We all know that, we've been through it. That's how we're sitting here right now. As Colleen was saying, these people are appointed, elected, they apply, things like that. So no, I'm not just gonna ask someone that's involved in ASAC to be like, hey, come Senate, represent ASAC. As I was talking with Legislative Coordinator Ose, any student can be involved with any of these groups. That doesn't mean they identify with that group. So I could visit ASAC, I could be part of it, I could run events for it, things like that, but I'm not Asian. I can't represent the Asian American population in school. So just the process of choosing these people is just as intricate as the process of appointing and electing people for USG. And as a Puerto Rican student, you can't tell me, if you're not Puerto Rican, that you can tell me what my best interest is in the school, in USG, in the world, just in general. So I think it's completely democratic to include as many voices as possible, because I think we can all agree that our job is to serve the student body, and we can't make that Rita's burden as the cultural. We can't make that her burden. That's her job as a senator, but she can get help from getting opinions and the voices of the people who are being directly affected by these issues. Yeah.
Thank you, Senator. Senator Allen, or excuse me, Deputy.
Thank you. So I want to say just off the bat that I'm strongly in favor of the idea of giving cultural centers and organizations like that voting rights. When I first joined USG and found out they didn't, I thought that was kind of insulting to those groups because it's saying, well, we want your voice, but we don't want to give you voting rights. So I think this is a great fix to that problem. But an objection that I have is, number one, to having like 4 different seats allocated to Greek life, 5 if you include the person who already represents Husky Village. And then on top of that, to have those be ex officio seats. I think that we should give additional representation to Greek life, but they shouldn't get 5 seats. And I think that the seats they do get should be democratically elected. I don't think that this is the appropriate way to give representation to people. Going back to the points that have been made previously about democratic process, I think where possible, we should always let people like directly elect their representatives. I yield.
So I think we can all agree on that point of USG is to represent those voices that are not represented. So like just because we don't know where to draw the line with certain organizations doesn't mean that we shouldn't give any representation at all. I think that's a little bit outlandish. And you know, for those maybe religious sports organizations, they still have a say in USG. We just had MSA come up and write some legislation, and we passed it. So these like other groups still have a say in USG. And I think we've already said so many times that it's not random. The process of electing representatives is not random, and it is democratic. And I just like this legislation here like completely like resonates with the mission statement. And if we don't like pass it as it is, or we take out like a good chunk of groups, we're not following our mission statement. So I don't think that there should be much debate. Yeah, the specifics of the number of seats, that's another conversation, but in terms of like keeping these groups, I do think that we should, and I think it would be hypocritical.
Thank you, Senator. Senator Frank. You have 2 minutes.
So, I can speak to this as the chairperson of Internal Affairs. We saw this bill not once, we saw it twice. We looked through all of the verbiage. The first time we mostly looked over, but not a lot of people have talked about the MCD seats, of which we are appropriating hypothetically 7 for any group that feels that they are not represented on this campus, as well as extending the enfranchisement to all the cultural centers, which honestly, given everything that's happened, is a no-brainer. I'm really happy about everything in this bill. That's also why I did, but along with my committee, I feel in large part, sponsored this bill. We didn't pick the tier 3s at random, right? We work with all of you. We work with your residence halls, and we work with your schools. We work with CLAS, we work with business, we push initiatives. Perfect. We work with the New Voters Project. We work with renewable energy. Why, when we pass statements of position on your climate strike, should you not get a chance to voice your concerns here in a democratic way? I fail to see how that's undemocratic, right? Herg and Subag help us run this university and advocate for students. It is our job inherently to empower those students and include them in our organization, just like how many people in here are voting members on both of those organizations themselves. We're not inviting WHUS here, right? Another tier 3 to tell us what to do. We are advocating for students by empowering those organizations that also seek to empower students. And for anyone who votes against this bill or against that part, I'm just confused. Thanks.
Thanks, Senator. Do you have a motion or point?
Yeah, I'm not sure how exactly this would be put on there. I'm not sure exactly how that would be put on there, but in terms of the council, the cultural ones I know could collaborate with
The cultural ones I know could collaborate with the cultural center ex officio seats, but in terms of all of the seats, would it be possible to kind kind of condense all of them into a Greek council ex officio seat, so they can all collaborate with each other to have one voice advocating for their best interests at once, and any interests that don't fit within that specified interest, they could work with their cultural centers to advocate those specific ones.
Okay. Do you have a amendment you'd like to propose?
Motion to amend to take out A3 to A7 and replace it with a Greek council. Specifics coming later, but just Greek council that.
I got it.
That's 7.
7 is the international.
Oh, sorry, 6. And just replace it with just a Greek council.
Hello.
Do we have a second?
They make 11% of the population.
Yeah,
Allow 4%.
Okay, we're now in discussion on this motion. Any more discussion? Senator Shirley.
So I understand the desire to condense down the Greek life into one structure, but I don't think it's our place to be creating a whole new entity with which, very different student organizations on this campus. Greek life is not, it's not a monolith. There's different types of Greek life, there's different types of student organizations, and to tell them without any input from any of their student leadership that we're now going to take 4 very different groups, 4 very different conglomerates, and put those, which are already conglomerates and representatives of dozens of other groups, into one thing that we've created, I don't think that makes sense. I don't even know what mechanism we go about telling these groups, you're now part of a Greek council, nominate a person for a seat. That doesn't make sense. I think it's antithetical to the spirit of USG to be going and telling other groups what to do with their internal external affairs. I know we have some members of Greek life out here today. I don't think you would agree with that, and I think we should either go to eliminate Greek life from this conclusion or keep them in there. I don't think we should be creating new entities. Otherwise, why not just create like a student activism entity and have PERG and the College Democrats and Turning Point all in one? You could essentially do that all for every single one. So, that's how to do that.
Thank you. Next on the speakers list, we have Senator Torrey. And we're going to cap the speakers list for this, because we got to get going here.
Can we
So-
have the authors, at least one of the authors to the legislature?
Yeah, sure.
For sake of brevity, I agree almost totally with what he has to say. IFC, Pan-Hellenic, Intercultural Greek Council, completely different entities. They have nothing to do with each other. They don't necessarily collaborate that often. To throw them all together is to do them a disservice. I yield.
Senator Torrey's both well, I'd like to remove my name from speakers list.
Thank you, Senator. So we have your response. Thank you. We have Senator.
Pretty much agree with the past 2 speakers. Just from a personal perspective, I'm a Carolina woman, and I just don't see how, for example, just how anyone from ISD can advocate for me where I just don't see that, it just doesn't work. Carolina is this entire council of all female social sororities in Carolina. I don't see how all of the male version of that is supposed to represent me. So this motion doesn't work. I agree with that.
Thank you, Senator.
These 2 senators are fantastic. I love your work.
All right, so with that, we're going to move into a vote. All those in favor on this amendment, which would be striking these few lines here, please say aye. All those opposed, please say nay.
Nay.
Any abstentions? Okay, 1 abstention. 2 abstentions. 3 abstentions. Okay, we're still voting. Okay, so this clearly fails. We are now back in the previous motion.
Motion to table.
Okay.
Motion to table until the next second.
Okay, that's in order. Do we have a second? No, it's in the back. All those in favor of tabling until next Senate, please say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed, please say nay.
Nay.
Any abstentions?
Division.
Okay. Well, I didn't get the abstentions yet, but I heard it. Okay. All those in favor of tabling, please stand up. All those opposed to tabling, please stand. Any abstentions? We got 2. I won't make a stand up here. 3. Okay. This passes. This has been tabled until the next setting. It was 14 to 12 to 3. Yeah. 14 to 12 to 3. I don't know. Great. So is that that quorum? Yeah. Okay. We don't have 29. What do you think? I don't think we have quorum.
29 is quorum.
We have 28.
The body can take actions to either move things to the next meeting or take steps to achieve quorum. So we can continue to talk about things, we just can't pass.
Because we did not refute or accept this, instead we tabled it to a later time, which we do have quorum.
Wait, quorum.
Okay.
You're about to just like hear everything to
Sit down, you're still 2 hours late. Come here. Okay. Thank you for coming. Yeah, come on. Do we want to revote?
No. Wait, no. Don't we have to brief him in though?
Yes. Okay, do we feel that a revote is a good idea?
No. It's a motion to reconsider, Mr. Speaker.
It's fine if there's a motion, but there's no mechanism to unilaterally move back into a vote.
Okay, so I'll look favorably upon a motion to reconsider then. Okay, we got one. Is there a second? Great, we got one. So we are going to re-vote on tabling, right? Is that what we're doing? Re-voting on tabling. That's great. All those in favor of tabling, please stand up. Please stand up. Please. No.
We need to vote on moving back into having a re-vote and then vote.
So a motion to reconsider is something that you all have the option to do if you feel like you want to talk about something that you already did. So if someone makes a motion to reconsider and it's seconded, the question is, do you want to reconsider a decision you already made?
Okay.
If you liked the decision, you should probably vote no on this. If you did not like the decision, then you want to vote yes, you do want to reconsider.
So, okay, to be clear here, if you stand up, it means you want to reconsider, which means we're going to essentially re-talk about tabling. Is that correct? So if you would like to continue talking about tabling, stand up. Please stand up.
It's to reconsider.
Yep, this is to reconsider. So essentially we re-voted to. Okay. Great. So that's 8. 10. So that's 10 votes. Great. So if you do not want to reconsider, and if you are fine with the final vote, please stand up. That's 15 to 10. Right? So any abstentions, please stand up. One abstention. So by a vote of 10 to 15 to 1, some folks didn't vote. That's what happened, I think.
Who's not voting? Who's not voting?
Yeah, so I guess. Yeah, there we go. So this is going to take. Yep.
Is it possible to reorder the agenda? Jesus.
Yes, so an agenda functions as a list of things that we're going to move through. So the chair of the body will call the next item and ask for move for a second. But just like at any other time of the meeting where you could motion to do anything, you could motion or move into, any senator can make a motion for any item on the agenda, and we would move into that, assuming it got a second. And the speaker took the chair to the vote.
Okay, so because we did not decide to reconsider,
Did we finish whatever we just voted on?
I was trying to say that, but we had a comment. Okay, so we voted to table the Pierce Act to the next meeting. Are we correct?
Yeah.
Yeah. So now we're moving on to the next thing we're going to talk about here, right? So the next thing we're going to talk about on the agenda, right, is the promise. There it is. Promise. Yes.
Okay, so the Bible says you don't have to motion and second to promise. We can motion and second to do anything on the agenda.
So
rather than doing it, we just.
Luke.
I motion to move to the statement of position regardless of historical preservation.
Do you have a second? Call it to that. Okay. So, do you want to come up with a few comments?
Point of order.
Yep.
We have to vote on presenting it before we present it.
Okay. Yes.
If we go down to order, extra vote.
Okay, so all those in favor of voting on the statement of position regarding, discussing, all those in favor of discussing a statement of position regarding historical preservation, please say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed, please say nay. Any abstentions? So if you want to talk about a statement of position regarding historical preservation, stand up. Talk about it right now.
Oh wait.
Okay. All those against, talk about statement of historical significance right now. Preservation.
Why do you hate me?
Any abstentions? Okay. Great. So this motion clearly passes. We'll now talk about, we'll now discuss the statement of position regarding historical preservation.
Ethan, I can resume the chair.
Okay, so can you speak to that?
It should be there. We'll work on that problem.
So today I would like us to vote on this statement of position I've drafted with Dalton, and which has gone through student development. It concerns the preservation of historical buildings on campus. The first point addresses that the university has plans to tear down some buildings that have been marked as contributing to the historic district in a previous plan. And I would very much like to encourage them to change this with this piece of legislation, to not tear those buildings down. And also, in the second part of this piece of legislation, I hope to invite the university to join us and other organizations in an initiative to repurpose and do whatever we may with the university to ensure that many of our historical buildings, which currently are not being well kept, become well kept and preserved for future generations. Currently, we have a task force in student development that's working on this, and I feel this legislation would help really give us the proper forum to talk with the university, and it shows that the undergraduate student government believes in the preservation of our historical buildings that are for students, not for veterans, I guess, have preserved for us today. Yeah, that's about it.
It should be in the draft now, that's the question. We're going to move into questions now. The author, we're going to go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And then Stuart.
Before going into the discussion, do we have quorum?
We do not have quorum, but we can still continue to discuss things. Now, we also can take measures to achieve quorum. I can call Holly in, and I think that gets us to quorum for the sake of a vote. So we will do that at the end, so it's like, just cross the line if necessary. But she's also gonna come back, perhaps calling in to vote is sanctioned in our rules. So the plan right now is to just discuss, and when it's time to vote, call Holly in to get quorum, and then vote. Yes.
Theoretically, we have here that the ex-officios have voting rights and then reform?
No, because a couple of reasons. One, because it's a constitutional amendment. Two, because for every person you add, you also push quorum one more person away. Right? We need to take people out of Senate, not add them to it.
What if it, since we added 2 people to Senate technically just now, wouldn't that make us
We tabled legislation. We didn't add anyone to Senate.
I was thinking if there's something else that's one.
Oh my gosh, you're right. I was using an old list. I apologize. Stuart is no longer, no offense, but you're no longer a member of the body. If we have 28 people, we have quorum. So,
I'll take it.
But, Alright, so we have a motion and a second to move to the previous question on historical preservation. There's already been a motion and a second. There's going to be no discussion. We're going to move into a vote. All those in favor, please signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed? Any abstentions? Alright, you guys clearly have it. Now we're going to move into a vote. Why are you waving your placard around? You can't object when there's a vote. You can only object when we
Point of inquiry?
by unanimous consent.
Where is this bill in the meeting 9 folder?
It should be in there now. It's called a copy of the statement of position. I added it. If you reload the page, I added it recently.
Okay, thank you.
So we voted to move to the previous question. So now we're going to move into a vote on historical preservation. All those in favor, please signify by saying aye.
In favor of what?
Okay, hang on. So that vote we just had was a motion to the previous question. Okay, that means end debate. It passed. Now we're moving into consideration of the legislation, a vote on the legislation. All those in favor of the historical preservation statement of position, please signify by saying aye. Aye. Those opposed? Nay. Any abstentions? 2. The chair. In the opinion of the chair, the ayes have it. Motion carries. I'm going to move that we consider the budget. Is there a second to that motion? Second goes to, he hasn't gotten to it. All right, I'm going to yield to the comptroller to present his budget. This is in the drive, should be called the 2020 budget, the spring 2020 budget, maybe. It should be a spreadsheet.
All right, folks, let's make this brief. So, important things. The $850,000 for student fees is an estimate, because I don't have a number for the spring right now. Scroll up, please. The starting balance, can you click on the note? The starting balance as of December 4th, which is today, we have $1,234,098 in cash, plus $70,000 worth of reserves. Sum those together, subtract about $650,000 worth of accounts payable. What that means is those are expenses that have not been deducted from our account, but that we have promised to pay. So subtract that, and we have, which is essentially an estimate of $654,098 of rollover into the spring 2020 semester. And it's about a $30,000 increase-ish from the spring semester. So my goal was to reduce rollover. Unfortunately, we increased it. It's rolled down. So, going to break down, please. So, lots of things were kept similar to the previous for the fall 2019 budget. All the expenses for the Office of the President, the Office of the Comptroller, the Office of the Speaker, the Judiciary, Act Affairs, scroll down a little bit, please. External Affairs, Student Development, and Student Services have all been updated. So I spoke with the respective heads of those committees, and they gave me updated expenses for spring 2019. And the general expenses basically rolled over from the previous budget. So the way this budget stands is it's a preliminary budget. So this is in compliance with the bylaws. I'm supposed to present a preliminary budget for the following semester, or the semester before. So this is technically for all of spring. However, it is my goal to present a finalized budget for all expenses in the spring during the first Senate of the spring semester. So the expenses that you see here are really for up until the middle of February. At least that's what I asked for. And I moved the tier 2 funding up. It was in not in a category at the bottom. I moved it up into the comptroller because now we have the comptroller's funding appeals. So that is the cap that I have placed for the comptroller's funding appeals. So if we hit $75,000 worth of comptroller's appeals, no more will be granted. We don't anticipate hitting that, but we'll see. That's it. Any questions?
Any questions? Yeah, go ahead, Paul.
So, I just want to make sure I understand. This budget is only applicable until we pass the final real budget, right?
This is the budget, and essentially we're going to pass, I guess, amendments to it. That's my understanding.
Okay.
So I called it a preliminary budget, but this budget begins January 1st and runs until June 30th, I believe. You're welcome.
What is, I guess, order or like kind of clarification? I don't know how to do it. But essentially, the way that it is outlined in the bylaws, we have to pass both the preliminary and a final budget. The preliminary budget is supposed to be passed at the final meeting of the semester prior to the beginning of the semester that the budget is in effect for. And then the final budget is what we always do. This is just something that is in our bylaws. It says it's supposed to be there, and then we're supposed to pass it if we want to keep it as is again at the beginning of next semester. And if not, we make any changes that we need to make to it. So it is kind of amendment, but this is preliminary and that's fine.
Okay.
So that is binding, this is essentially non-binding.
That's not right.
Yes.
Okay, so that's what we're doing, but obviously there will be updates because these are not all the expenses for the spring.
Is that a question? Are there any other questions? No? Motion? Actually, excuse me, I apologize. Sorry, I'll go right
So
ahead.
I was just curious, so Senate first fund, that's like the Senate stuff, right?
No, the Senate first.
I'll take it if you don't mind. The Senate First Fund exists, it's never been used, but it exists if potentially somebody was struggling to afford business casual or business formal, it exists so Senate can include, USG can take care of that cost, so no one feels uncomfortable or left out when we declare this exception.
Can I add something really quick? Something I just noticed. So the water bottle refill stations, I believe we passed in the fall budget. I got an email this afternoon from Senator Hill about this. So the goal is to have the refill stations paid for by December 31st. So the fall budget would account for that. If they're not paid for by then, the spring budget will account for it.
I was also going to add a thing. Really, if we included that, or I wanted to, in case facilities is willing to install some over the spring semester, as we have a sort of break spring semester, and we don't have this whole winter break, I'm slightly doubtful that they will. So it's possible that we won't be done.
Cool, thank you. Any other questions?
Questions? All right,
I have a motion to amend.
all right, John, let's focus on questions first, and then we'll go to the discussion amendments. I promise we'll be first one.
So seeing as how we just expanded what can be funded, do you think it would be appropriate to also increase tier 2?
I'll answer your question. I do not think it's appropriate. The reason why it's not appropriate is A, the whole comptroller's appeals things, those don't happen right now. So once your funding is denied, it doesn't get funded. That's new, so that's why it's in its own category. The $650,000 has not been increased because, like I said, as of today, we have spent $511,000 worth of tier 2 funding. So I'm confident that that $140,000-ish difference would be enough to cover anything from variances. Any other questions? No? Awesome.
Motions, Dalton, what was that?
Motion to amend the line item under the student development section. As it stands to be committee meeting food and incentives, I'd like it to be committee meeting room, comma, food and incentives.
Okay.
Room
Is
reservation.
there a second? Is there a second to that motion? All right, Bentley?
It's just adding room to that list.
All right, great. We don't have edit access, so we'll change that later.
I'll change that. What is it? Shouldn't that be then for all of the committees?
If such a motion would be on the table, it could be considered.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, what was this now?
Okay, so we just changed committee meetings, what was it, committee meeting?
Meeting food and incentives to committee meeting room reservations, food and incentives.
Is this something that will then be finalized in the final budget?
I'll change it.
Well, that's been motioned and seconded already, that passed, right? If you would like to change it for everything, is there a motion? Go ahead.
I motion for that so that we can just do it as regular as we go.
Yeah, okay, is there a second for that motion to do it for the rest of them? Great, you take it, okay, awesome. All right, is that it, what is it? Yeah, go ahead.
Why, would there be a need for room reservations or
So my understanding is that, just like with the rakes, the shovels that external codes went up against, if it's not listed in the line item, you cannot use the money that's allocated for that reason. I would assume that every committee, some of them have set aside money for room reservations if need be, but others seem not to have. And I, as far as student development, can say that we would like to have the option for room reservations if need be. But now you would.
Okay, that amendment, the amendment has passed. If you would like to make an amendment changing it back, that's unprecedented, but, yeah.
I would motion to amend, in student service committee food pantry to the food and spirit task force, because we're not just focusing on anything. Just want to make sure we have the work with that.
Is there a second to that motion? Second was to approach, is that taken as read?
Yeah. Can I make a suggestion for one last minute? ACA Fair has 2 line items for food and incentives. Can we strike the one that doesn't say space and food?
Is there such a motion? Is there, Howie and then Athena? Second is fine. All right, is that a motion?
Yes. For the Transportation and Recreation Town Hall within Student Services Committee to be changed to Recreation Town Hall.
Recreation Town Hall.
Yeah.
Is there, you making an amendment?
Yes.
To change it to Recreation Town Hall, is there a second?
I'm friendly.
Okay, well, there is a second. Since it's been taken as unfriendly, we need to have discussion, please keep it brief. We'll go with you, and then you, and we will vote. Go ahead.
That was specifically meant to be for one town hall. It wasn't, the purpose of the town hall is supposed to be solely for recreation, not transportation and recreation.
Okay, the reason why it reads that way is because the email that I got from Chairperson Pan says that. So that's why I'm comfortable changing that, seeing that it's not here. So, yeah, I'm against it.
All right, time to vote. All those in favor of the amendment, please signify by saying aye. Aye. All those opposed? Any abstentions? 1, 2, 3. The ayes have it, motion carries. All right. We're moving to a vote. All those in favor of the spring 2020 preliminary budget, please signify by saying aye. Aye. All those opposed? Any abstentions? All right. Really fast. I'm going to motion to, there are 2 bylaw amendments, membership and legislation. There's 2.
Yeah.
And elections. We're going to motion to do those all by unanimous consent. Are there any objections? See, no. All right. Is there a specific one or to all of them? So, membership, legislation, election policies. 3 bylaw amendments that spend most of their time reordering things. motioning to do this by unanimous consent. Are there any objections? Is that an objection? Which one?
I would say that the membership and legislation don't have to move tonight. They're kind of just structural things. As far as the elections one, I do certainly take your point. But I think it would be a little unfair to get into the spring semester when elections start and leave the hands of the election oversight commissioner a little tied and not allow people who know that they're going to campaign to have the rules that they're going to do it.
Well, aren't the elections official, like, from March 1st on? So
Whenever the election oversight commissioner sets the timeline to be.
So, in the past, changing election policies in the same semester as an election has been extremely problematic. So I'm not saying that you're wrong, I totally understand your point, but to be fair to the people, as Chairperson Douglas said, that will be running in the spring, I think it's only fair to them that the rest of us take a little bit of time now and just push on through and get these policies, over and done with. I promise I will present them at lightning speed, but I really feel that it's important to get at least the election policies done tonight.
Okay, hang on. Does anyone object to me motioning to do legislation and membership? Because it sounds like the election one is where people are getting. So I'm going to now motion to do membership and legislation by unanimous consent. Does anyone object? Seeing none, Ms. Solo. Okay, I'm going to allow Chief Justice Moore to present the election policies. We need a motion for this. Motion goes to Collins, second goes to Scott.
Thank you. Could you pull up, please? I apologize, my laptop died long ago. Frankly, if anybody has any questions about this, I'll just yield right to them because it's just a restructuring of policies, as you can see by my extremely descriptive whereas clauses. It's basically a consolidation, and it's making everything a lot easier to read. I will yield to questions.
Are there any questions?
Are there any substantial changes?
Please scroll down slowly. A little fast. No.
Any other questions? All right, seeing none. All right, thank you. We'll move into a vote. All those in favor of passing these election policies, please signify by saying aye. Aye. All those opposed? Any abstentions? In the opinion of the chair, the ayes have it. The motion carries. All right, lovely. Now we're going to have a motion to consider back pay legislation. Is there a motion? Motion goes to Collins. Is there a second? Second goes to Howard. All right. I'm going to invite the authors up to speak on it. Joseph.
All right, here's the situation. We'll keep this brief for your time. In the can you scroll down to the first footnote? Sorry, second, and click on this. Let's go past it. Number 2. And can we take a look at the therefore clauses? All right, that last therefore right there. All right. This is the first piece of legislation that USG passed as far as executive compensation goes. That last clause right there says that those bylaws shall come into effect at the beginning of the fall 2019 semester. All right. Can we head back to the legislation? Thank you. Essentially, here's what happened. USG hired people in the spring, effective for most of their hiring dates are in May, and they did work in those positions. They were informed by the then comptroller that they would be compensated for doing work while in those positions, right? So people did work after being hired, went through the normal hiring process, and recorded those hours and proceeded as though they were expecting to get a check for the work that they did, right? Now, how that squares with that clause we just looked at is not totally great. But at the end of the day, people did work, they put in time for USG over the summer, and they did so in some instances in lieu of a different job. And I think it is unfair to leave them, and I shouldn't really totally say them, because I myself will directly benefit if this passes. I'll put that out there, because I did in fact work over the summer, and I have a timesheet that backs that up. For the work done over that period of time, under the illusion that it would have been compensated, because the person who hired me and the person who hired us, the comptroller at that time, told us it would be. And I think it would be unfair to leave myself and the other people in the same position hanging. So this legislation is to rectify that.
All right, you go. Yep. If you'd like to.
Monty pretty much, or Chairperson Douglas pretty much covered it all. That is, yeah, basically all I have to say. I would like to note this would include past Chief Justice Nicole Gagnon as well as former Comptroller Amanda, as they run forward at the time.
Questions?
So the assumption while being hired, this was communicated through JobX or communicated directly from previous comptroller and then?
Well, the JobX had a rate attached to it, and in his word, quote, he will be paid.
Also, I'd like to point out, as soon as you were hired, you had to fill out all the documentation, legal documentation right away, and then to predicate getting paid. And then we were also given timesheets to track hours that would work with the intent to receive compensation for that.
Other questions? Senator Blunt?
So, if we're going to back pay, do we have to include the previous comptroller who we impeached?
Yeah, he did work during that time.
Yeah.
Or, I haven't seen his timesheet, but presumably, the people who have access to it will take a look, and pursuant to the same time approval policies that we are following right now, if the determination will be made if those hours are approved, if they're not approved, whatever, and we move forward. But it would be, in my opinion, wrong of us to, out of hand, say that we're not going to pay him for the work that he did while he was the duly elected comptroller.
I agree.
Just as another point, it would also be illegal. Look,
Yeah, it's one of those.
Yeah, that, yeah.
Questions?
Yeah, I have a question. Not to sound ridiculous, but what is the point if we vote no and it's illegal anyway?
No, hang on, time out. What I meant by being illegal, so it's illegal for us to pay some people and not others. All right?
Understood.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Clear? All right. Senator Scott, questions, further questions?
How much will this cost?
We estimate up to 5,000.
I can elaborate on that more if you want as well.
Yes.
So this is a super rough estimate that I did based on assuming the highest rates for everyone at the time available, also the maximum hours we think anyone worked. So we expect a significant amount, the actual amount, excuse me, to be significant.
All right. Any further questions? All right, seeing none, discussion time. All right, those are the two motions, Senator Scott.
I'd like the motion to move into executive session with only voting members of the Senate present, considering this directly affects a personnel issue that we had addressed earlier in the semester.
Hang on. Does that include me and the Chief Justice?
You are a voting member of the Senate, yes. I would amend it to include the Chief Justice, yes.
We're also paid. Like, if this legislation pays.
I think you want to talk about a personnel matter, not talk about a conflict of interest.
Yes.
Okay, fine. There is a motion. There is a question.
I have a quick question, and maybe this is for Operation Manager. I understand that there's 3 legal reasons why we can enter executive session, and if we don't, if not one of those 3 reasons, it's illegal. So would this fall under one of those 3 reasons why we could do that?
Can I respond, Mr. Speaker?
Yes.
I believe it's personal changes. Another one is a discussion of contract, and there might be there's a third one. Devani, do you know the third one?
Negotiations or contract negotiations.
Yes.
Yeah.
Discussing.
I would question whether or not that would be appropriate at this time, as opposed to whether or not such a motion would be legal.
That is.
But whether or not it's appropriate to move into executive session on while discussing this legislation to talk about that. I don't think it is.
I believe it's directly pertinent to the content of the legislation.
All right, there is a motion made. Is there a second? Second is to Senator Malani. All right, there is definitely going to be discussion on this, so I will yield to Meeting Chief of Staff and propose other motions.
But I would say if this is something like this motion is something you're going to consider, the author should be present for any discussion considering it's the legislation.
The reason to not include the authors is not to exclude you from the process. The reason is because the personnel issue pertains to impeachment hearing, and during the impeachment hearing, the only people who would be present for the content of this discussion would be voting senators. So because this would take place this pertains to actions that took place during the deliberation section of the impeachment hearing, I believe that it is important that only voting senators are here to adhere to both our bylaws and law. Thank you.
Point of personal privilege, many of the senators were not elected.
That's not
during
my
that
personal
time,
privilege.
or- Sorry, we're getting in order.
Yeah, so I would note a few things there. A number of the senators who are presently in this room were not sitting at that time. So if the idea is to only include people who are in that room, that would also include a no longer senator and a no longer senator sitting to your right. So I don't know if this motion directly goes after what you're trying to do here. I would also question whether or not revisiting the impeachment discussion right now makes sense, given what the legislation is. If there is something, about the time sheet, we do have clauses in the legislation that do have the comptroller, the sitting comptroller, review that time sheet as he would mine today.
Can I clarify?
Yeah, go right ahead.
The intent of the motion is not to include senators who are sitting at the time of the impeachment. The intent of the motion is to include senators who would sit currently if there were to be a deliberation on the impeachment today. They have the right to speak about the deliberation as any sitting senator would, considering that they would be present if the impeachment were to happen today.
Okay, we're going to vote now. All those in favor of moving into executive session, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All those opposed, please signify by saying nay.
Nay.
I'm going to call a vision on that one. All those in favor, please stand up.
Point of information, you guys are doing until 10, what are we going to do?
I'm going to go talk to the AV staff, and they're going to be cool with it.
Thank you.
All right, so what was that? What was it? 11. Please sit down. All those opposed to moving into executive session, please stand up. Any abstentions? Hang on, I got confused there. Hang on. Everyone sit down. All those in favor, please stand up. I'm sorry, I lost it. In favor of moving to executive session. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. Sit down. All those opposed to moving to executive session, please stand up. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. Okay, sit down.
I'm going to add standing up.
So you voted in favor of moving to executive session. All right. Any abstentions? 1, 2, 3, 4. Then we are at the opinion of the chair, not opinion of the chair, a vote of 13, no, it was 13 to 9 to 4, 5. How many voted? It passed. There were more people who voted yes than voted no. You're not Senator. I'm going. Yeah, everyone shut your laptops.
Google executive session CC.
All right. We're not in executive session. My apologies. Sorry. Okay. We're going to move at we're gonna just continue having discussion on legislation. There was a motion. Oh, that was a speaker, so we're on the speakers list now. Is that a motion? What is it? I'm ruling that out of order. We're not moving into the previous question on whether or not to pay people without significant discussion. 1, 2, 3, go ahead. Wait, Alex was actually first on the list. We do. My apologies.
All the people who have their placards up now, are those adding to the speakers list or points or motions?
I had a point of information.
Okay, go ahead.
Since I'm not sure if we have 28 voting senators still, so what would that cause?
1, 2, 3, 4, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. I'm not. Yeah, it's not Lauren, it's Mike. We can call Holly Ann. Can you call her? Awesome. What?
Oh, I have another senator I can call if need be.
I think we're set, but we appreciate it. Thank you. All right, then, Alex, you're up.
Okay, so I'm going against this on partially the basis. Can we do a quick straw poll? Raise your hand if you're getting paid to be here right now.
You can't ask that.
It's a
She
straw poll.
absolutely can ask that.
Yeah.
Whether you
You don't have to
respond
answer
to
it.
that is up to you.
Cool. Okay. That's a quick point for the work that we do as senators every single day is unpaid. The work that we contribute to this organization is unpaid, whether it's over the summer or whether it's through the semester or whether it's sitting here right before finals week. And I had a final this morning and I have an essay due on Friday and I'm sitting here through all of this, through really great things that are happening, precious things that are happening. And the work over the summer is important. I get that. I understand that. But does not mean that it should be paid every step of the way, especially because the thing that we originally passed, the bill concerning executive compensation, said that it didn't go into effect until fall. Like, we're ignoring that part of it to say that, oh, this is a thing that should happen. That was something Damani brought it up. Sorry, Chairperson Douglas brought it up right at the beginning. I'm glad that he was very transparent about it, but he brought it up. And we're just gonna walk over that saying, oh, well, they did work, so they have to get paid for it. And I would also like to recognize, again, that both of the authors will directly benefit from this. And a majority of the speakers were not here when voting on the original, or were not sworn in when voting on the original piece of legislation. So to me, that feels like, can you scroll down a little? Sorry, thanks. So to me, that feels like kind of stepping around people and using people to their advantage to get something through for people who don't know any better. And to me, that doesn't feel right. That there are certain senators that weren't here for conversations about executive compensation, or weren't here about the original voting, and are sponsoring something like this. And I hope that they were fully informed. I really, really do. But part of me thinks that they weren't, and that just doesn't sit right with me. And the work that we do as senators is constantly overlooked. And I'd really like to get paid to sit here, but I'd say vote against this.
Point of information.
Yeah.
This is a question to anybody who was paid, or was under the impression that they were going to get paid. At what point during the summer did you realize that you were not going to be paid?
I didn't realize I was not getting paid for summer work until after the semester had started, about a little ways into it. We knew we weren't getting paid during the summer, but we were told it would be taken care of upon return to campus because Senate had to approve it.
We were told we would all be issued checks, and we got here and we were told that would no longer be the case.
But you did not receive direct deposit at all, or a payment during the summer at all?
Can I?
And you were aware?
Yeah, briefly.
Yeah, so in the legislation, I spelled this out a little bit. In order for us to have things like direct deposit, we would have to have Husky time or Core CT and have access to those profiles. When we left, we didn't have access to those. So the university's payroll system didn't have us as part of those. So the comptroller at the time said, y'all are about to leave, so here's what we're going to do until we can get this fixed.
I guess what I'm asking is, you were aware that you were not part of the university payroll system for the summer and proceeded to continue to work through the summer. That's.
We were aware that we were not in the payroll system as of when we left.
Okay. You have anything? Yeah. Anything else? Do you have a question? You have a question?
Yeah. So my question is like, is the main concern the school not being transparent about whether or not you were getting paid, or is it making sure that everyone will get paid for their summer?
The second. I believe the second.
Do you have a point of
No, I
motion?
mean like them not knowing that they were getting paid.
Oh, okay. I guess possibly a bit of both, but this legislation only addresses the second. There is much to be done about the first.
Do you have a point of motion? Yeah, maybe if you have a minute.
Kind of off the same question, for anyone who was under the impression that they were being paid for the summer, do you personally feel? Those guys are right to not respond to this, but do you personally feel that you would have done less work or less important work because you were not being paid?
15, 20 seconds.
You can answer, everybody can answer, it doesn't have to.
So I just want to talk a little bit about the difference when people were applying. So these jobs were advertised as jobs. They were advertised as paid from the origins of when executive compensation was passed. So when people get hired for jobs, they get paid for the work that you do. Yes, there's a difference between people that that did not apply knowing that they were going to get paid. Like for example, me and Manny ran on the contingent that we were not going to get paid as president and vice president, but everyone else who applied as a governing board member applied because as soon as they started, they were going to get paid for the work that they completed.
Okay, so then the other question is, then where did that assumption come from? Because we passed legislation that said that that was not happening.
So I think there's a number of places that came from, but as you know, one of the authors on that legislation, and this could have been an error in my communication when I was speaking on the floor. The intention of myself and the speaker can add as he sees was to not pay the previous administration or the people in that administration, but to pay officials in the 2019-2020 year. The way that's written, that does say fall 2018 or fall 2019, and that was an accident on my part because that's not what the intent was, and I think I may have miscommunicated that when I was speaking on the floor, or perhaps given the president or the then comptroller, the then president and the then comptroller an incorrect impression. I don't think it's totally fair to leave the rest of the people hanging.
Do you have a point of motion?
Point of information.
Yeah.
So if the Uconn payroll website or as Uconn was being used, so the only thing that was being used at that time was honesty, is that or just my paper?
I'll add that that's still the case, right? Our timesheets get checked by the comptroller through the process that is outlined. I could, enter something for 24 hours, but Fabio would flag me for that, right? The same is still the case here.
Over the summer,
Nothing was reviewed over the summer because nothing was ready to be processed because, the comptroller would just be reviewing it for fun because the idea was once we come back, we would submit them all, and then things would be processed.
We're going to hear another speaker, and then we can go back into points of motion again.
Point of order, is this part of the project going back and forth like this?
Hot pros would have the damn speaker wants to be. So yes, you have the opportunity to
Yeah,
have.
no, I was just wondering if there was some sort of offer letter with like the timetable of this start date for position. I mean, that's how you do wrong work.
I can show you my onboarding paperwork.
Like when it's, let us, you get offer letters.
Senator Shen is at a point we should be here for brevity, but.
Yeah, so as soon as I was brought on, which is what the case with many people, we filled out an I-9, which we government documents, at least when we were starting our job, when we signed it.
Point of information, if I may, this may answer your question. We did talk to the Labor Department, did we not, as to whether or not we were compelled to do this and when we were onboarded? I will yield to the comptroller for this question.
So what I will relay to you is what I've been relayed, is what Kim Miller relayed to me, and that is what she said was based on the way the documentation, was what her words, based on the way the documentation was written, the Department of Labor said that summer back pay was not legally required. You can still pay them, but it's not legally required. That was a decision from the Department of Labor.
So basically what happened here, just to go over it again, in the legislation that the former comptroller went over and made many, many edits to, even up until like the night before it was passed, is that they were not going to be paid until fall 2019. He went over that many times. He went through that document. He knew that they weren't supposed to be paid until fall 2019. And still told them that over the summer they were going to be paid. He told them that over the summer he was going to be paid. They should not be paid for the work that they did over the summer. Historically, these positions have not been paid. These positions were not supposed to be paid until fall 2019. If anyone went over the legislation, they would have seen that. It would be unfair for us and going against the legislation we did to go and pay them for the work that they did over the summer. Yes, that was work. A lot of people did work. We've done work throughout the semester. But I don't think that it's fair that we are paying them for stuff that we clearly said we were not going to pay for over the summer. We appreciate all the work that you all did over the summer, and that was important work, but that work was not technically supposed to be paid. I also think that it is very wrong to pay former comptroller for knowingly saying that he should be paid for the work that he did over the summer. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator. Yeah, we're going to cap those through, folks. Senator Scott. Point of motion. Yeah.
A point of inquiry, like, I don't know if you're allowed to reveal this or not, but is it possible to know the approximation of, like, on average, how many hours you worked over the summer? For those who did work?
Can I answer the basic question with like further answer everything else? Yes, they can reveal it if they want to, but they're not compelled to.
Okay.
Okay. Any answer? Yeah. Okay. Just going to the floor.
Thank you very much, Mr. Deputy Speaker. I have a number of thoughts about this legislation, many of which I don't feel comfortable sharing because we are not going into executive session. Because this issue does directly pertain to, in my opinion, the impeachment procedures that we had earlier in the semester. These are actions taken by a member of, these are promises made by a member of the undergraduate student government who we've removed. We could go and talk about it if we move to go into executive session, but we shouldn't. So, based on the content of this legislation, it's been very clearly pointed out that we passed a piece of legislation that said that we will not pay these people until fall 2019. While the intent of the legislation may have not been to do that, that is what we did. We can go back and change our minds if we feel like it's right. But then the question is, where does this interpretation come from? Were the people who set out during the hiring right in saying that people would be paid immediately when the legislation didn't say so? And is that something that Senate should allow? For people to go and do what the legislation doesn't say and just change what we pass after we do it? I see this as an issue as we said something would happen, something didn't happen, and I feel bad for the people affected by it. It's not right. But ultimately, the Senate shouldn't be held accountable for something that we didn't pass. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator. Point of motion. Give a point of motion. A motion, please.
Can I motion to lay on the table? I feel like the body, not a lot of us are here, you know, a lot of senior senators, we don't have all the information. I personally like all the information, make a fully informed decision. But like, is this really like pertinent right now? Like, do you need to get paid for your summer hours? I think we need a full body, and then, like Louis said, go into executive session, then we can fully talk about it, because it's 10:13, some of us have finals, papers, and this isn't like a dire thing.
Sir, is your motion on the table?
Yes.
Table to the motion? Yeah.
So the only issue is
because the work was completed this, in 2019, I was speaking about this with Ron yesterday, it becomes a little bit of a problem, from my understanding, to try and back pay when you move into the new year, and that's why this was brought forward now. I'm under the impression that they still should be paid, but it becomes more difficult for some.
Okay. So are you still making a motion?
Yes.
Okay. So is there a second to that motion? Representative Perrone, thank you. So we're going to have a discussion on this motion. Speak on the motion.
I think that while there are a great number of people missing, and I think that happens, I think that the people that are here right now are informed enough to make a decision because within the citations slide and within the legislation itself, it lists out everything else. While I do think there are some benefits to going into executive session, maybe we should talk about it and have some of the voices speak on behalf of this. I think that we are an informed enough Senate and have the knowledge to move forward with this. And I think that while there are arguments to be made on both sides, at this point it's a little bit crying, and I am 100% also at fault for that. But like we are knowledgeable enough and informed enough to be trusted with this and to be trusted with the resources to move forward with this. So, sorry, no. That's
No more questions? No questions? Motion? Next speaker here, Senator Bay.
I don't think we should table this. I think that this was brought up here right now. We should just finish it, and I agree with Senator Vizcaya that we should take executive session, bring up some new points so that we avoid trying and we, conclude.
Senator Bonnie, National Speakers List.
So I personally agree with both of them, and I feel like it's pretty obvious that, there were complications with this this legislation from the start, and I feel like we should just vote on this already. I mean, I think a lot of this room is kind of has the same consensus at this point.
Okay. Thank you, Senator. And finally, we have Senator Athena.
I'd like to take my name off the list.
Thank you very much. Okay. So, I'm sorry? Yeah, that's the different speakers list. No worries about it. Okay, so seeing as no more speakers, we'll now move to a vote. All those in favor of tabling this motion, please just stand up. Table this to the next Senate. Does that work? Yeah, okay. All those opposed to tabling right now? Any abstentions? Okay, 2 abstentions. So from a vote of 2 to the rest of the people to 2, this motion really fails. All right, so we're going to move back to the previous motion, folks. We're going to go back to the speakers list. Do we have a motion? Please.
Can I yield to one of the authors?
You can, but it is your time to speak on the speakers list. You're on the speakers list. Okay. So.
Is this that you've been raising his pockets?
Yeah. Okay. Who is it? Who is the first one?
That was going to yield my time.
Okay. So your name's on the speakers list, so right there, so we have to speak. Does that work? Yeah. Okay. So next up, we do have Senator Shaw.
Just as a quick point, the building manager just walked by and pointed at her watch, so we do need to wrap this.
So we're gonna do 25 seconds.
That being said, I'll go really fast. So,
thank you very much.
The way I see this is that if chairperson's mind is different, then that might be true. I'm not going to speak to that. What I can speak to is what was presented to the Senate said that people weren't going to be paid. The Senate was like, yeah, okay, let's do that. And it's not our fault if former Comptroller Nedell disagrees and wanted to and informed them that they would be paid, despite the fact that the Senate said they wouldn't. In fact, if he did do that and he was still a comptroller, I mean, I would write the impeachment articles myself and put them on Justice Moore's desk. But he's not here because he was impeached. And frankly, I think that it's ridiculous that we're even entertaining that argument. And I think that if we want to follow our own rules, our own legislation, we cannot pay them. We said we weren't gonna, and now it's not fair to ourselves if we did that. That's all.
Thank you, Senator.
Point of information for somebody that knows, was Comptroller Nenadol involved in the hiring process of the employees that were supposedly told they would be paid?
Can I just dive into mine as well? I'll answer both and then just say it like that.
Yeah.
Okay. No, he was not part of the hiring process. Rebecca and I were. But that being said, he was the one that was in contact with Kimberly Miller, and then I pretty much touched base with her afterwards and we had to pick up the work. Essentially, when we mandated students to work over the summer because of that mandate, as they were already university employees, then they were mandated to get paid for that work. And so kind of that's why we were going back and kind of entertaining that, but we just didn't have time because of the whole engagement thing. Back to the summer. So yes, we were told that we were going to be paid. While Nino was not our supervisor, he was kind of our direct contact and liaison between Kimberly Miller. To kind of give a personal anecdote, so this summer I had...
Point of information, yeah, I think he's going outside still for the question.
I agree that he was able to move, right, because he is asking some questions.
I apologize.
Yeah, so no, just kind of give a personal anecdote. So for me, like I had an unpaid internship over the summer, and then I also had to get a job on top of that did not pay me a lot. So I dedicated a lot of time to USG, yes, because I enjoyed it, but also because there was that incentive that I would be getting paid for the work that I did outside of my 2 jobs over the summer. So that's kind of where some of the students that are coming from that they were working jobs concurrently while also doing USG work. Not to say that students don't do that every day during the semester, but that being said, it's just a little unfair for us to tell them that you're going to get paid and then come back later on and say, actually, you're not going to get paid. It's kind of difficult to get that to them. But that being said, we also do understand how unfair that could come across, but that's kind of just where we're coming from. So we didn't even just let anyone's toes.
Point of information.
Yes. Thank you.
Similarly, someone from last year's experience with past president Pia, I don't recall exactly if she had to take another job alongside USG work as the president.
Is this a question?
Yes,
What's the question? Is there another job besides
Did
her?
she have to take another job besides being president last year?
I don't think that's relevant.
I agree. Everyone's financial situation is different, and so there's no reason we should compare one person to another.
I have a motion.
Yes.
I'd like the motion to move the previous question. I believe at this point we're French running unless we go to executive session.
Second. Seconded. Great. We're now moving to discussion on this motion to. We're just going to vote then. Okay. All those in favor of returning to the previous question, please say aye. Aye. All those opposed to moving to the previous question, please say no. Any abstentions? Okay, this motion clearly passes. We now move to the previous question by voting. I think, yeah, I think we'll be voting. So all those in favor? All those in favor of
All those in favor?
Yeah, I'm sorry. Okay. All those in favor of voting on the bill concerning student and teacher summer compensation, please stand up if you vote. Pass. Correct. Okay.
Just still vote on the legislation.
Yeah. So all those in favor of voting for this legislation, please stand up. All those opposed? Any abstentions? All right. This motion clearly fails. Great.
I'm going to take the chair back.
Give it back.
All right, we're gonna move out of new business. Everything else is tabled until the spring semester. All right. Is there any discussion? Go ahead, discussion or announcement?
About what? About like this or?
Just anything. Would you like to talk about anything?
So, I just wanted to say thank you guys all for such a great semester, all the hard work, everything we've accomplished this semester is much. I'm so proud. And this is my first full semester as a senator. And like, I love you guys.
Anyone else?
Thank you very much for considering those funding policies, and I think we came to a compromise. I look forward to implementing them. I think they're going to be great for students. Have a great holiday week.
With that, meeting's adjourned at 10:20. Wait, hang on. We'll do announcements. Apologies. Doctor?
I just want to say, take care of yourselves in the next 2 days with finals and all this. And yeah, good luck on everything.
This just got added to the student services agenda. There's going to be a candidates conference next semester, and the speaker wants to get student perspective. So please pull up to the student services meeting tomorrow. He wants to talk to students, and I just want to get perspective. So.
Please, yeah, the meeting's not over.
Last week, former Vice President of the room was named a Truman Scholar. Rose. Well, she's a lot of things, but she is last week named a Rhodes Scholar. So if you see her, give her congratulations. She does a lot of really passionate work across campus. She absolutely deserves the recognition.
Anyone else? Well, thank you all for being here. I know it's late. I do appreciate it. Have a good night.
No, it's all right. I just want to talk to you. Thank you.
How dare you, Seth?